Welcome to another fantastic episode of RfRx. I am so glad that you're here with us today. My name is Eric Wells, and I'm the support group director for Recovering from Religion. And with me is my good friend and a fantastic regional director for Recovering from Religion, Sasha D'Souza. Welcome, Sasha.
Thank you very much, Eric. Welcome to everybody. It's great to see so many here, and I'm sure we'll get a lot more join us as the session continues.
Yeah. The waiting room is filling up, and we're letting more and more people in. This is great. I'm excited. I've been wanting to do this one for a while.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. This is a fantastic topic, and I think we've got two really qualified people with us today. Thank you both for being here.
Well, folks, just like at the beginning of every RfRx, we have a poll, and this poll has got some questions to kind of get you in the mindset of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we may bring this poll back up throughout the discussion to kind of reference it and maybe dispel some myths or whatever. But I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Now, keep in mind, your answers are anonymous. We're not going to see how you answer the question, so answer them truthfully. Let me read off the questions to you. Number one, how many people in your life, friends or family, are Mormon? 1 to 3, that's question number one, or answer number one. 4 to 6, 7 to 9, or 10 or more. Question number 2, how much wealth does the Mormon Church control? 100 million, 5 billion with a B, 75 billion with a B, or over 200 billion with a B? And the third question, which of these is prohibited by the word of wisdom, the Mormon health code? Caffeine, beer, ham, or herbs? English, our English language just is so weird because it starts with an H, so it should say like herbs, but it's
well,
herbs.
It does if you're Australian. If you're Australian and you speak properly, it's
maybe I should have had you read it. Yeah. Well, that's our poll, and that'll be running through this whole introduction until we start to introduce our guests. So, Sasha, tell us, what is RfRx? What are we doing here this evening?
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so if this is your first time here, welcome. RfRx is our weekly community presentation where we invite experts, guests who are qualified in their field, who have an experience with a particular part of life, maybe coming out of a type of religion, maybe coming out of a situation, a family life, changing things in their life. And they come and they present to us, and they help us with really practical stories, suggestions, tips, and guidelines. So it's not a replacement for our online community or the support groups that we have with Recovering from Religion. It's just an additional tool that we have in our toolbox that helps us to become the best version of ourselves. And today's presentation will certainly help with that, because we'll hear some really great advice, coping skills, particularly if people are coming out of, say, the Mormon faith. Now, RfRx is basically your show. It's your presentation. While Eric and I do the chatting and we have our guests along, please feel free to contribute. And you can do that by dropping questions in the chat. You can send those through, and when appropriate, we can put those questions to the guests if we have time. Now, we won't always be able to do that because there are so many people that will want to contribute, but this is a group discussion. This is an opportunity for all of us to hang out together and learn together. And we've had a lot of previous RfRx discussions and recordings, and you can find them all on the YouTube channel. So if you go to our Recovering from Religion YouTube channel, scroll through all of the previous discussions. How many have we had, Eric, over the years? How many different presentations would we have available?
I think we hit 70 last week or the week before, and so this might be 71 or 2. Wow. That's a lot. Yeah, we've been doing it since the beginning of April in 2020.
Fantastic.
Well, here at Recovering from Religion, we discussed what RfRx is. It's a show, a podcast, a discussion series put on by the main organization, Recovering from Religion. And so we shorten that just by saying RfR, so you'll kind of hear that as we talk through this. But we have a mission statement. So RfR offers hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And we've got quite a few programs to encompass and to help serve that mission. And so, Sasha, tell us, how do we pursue the healing part of our mission?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Healing is so important, particularly when we get to a point in life where we might have some changes or big things have happened. So RFR really does have that down pat. We have the helpline, and that's a peer support line that people can phone in anytime, 24/7, either telephone or online chat. And you can speak to an empathetic, kind person who just gets it, who understands what we're going through and is there to give a compassionate listening ear. Not necessarily qualified advice, but just a peer, a friend that can listen to us as we go through that. So yeah, healing is really important. And they have access to a fantastic array of resources off the resource tab, which you can also access some of which are from the main Recovering from Religion webpage. So that's our healing aspect. And the other part of the mission statement that Eric spoke about was hope. Now, when we get big things happen in life, sometimes we feel like there's no hope or we feel a little bit lost. Well, recovering from religion is really important in that way, because by sharing stories with one another, we're able to provide hope, suggestion, guidelines on how we've navigated a difficult path in life. And that can be sort of motivating to give somebody the strength to get through themselves. You know, we've used the expression a lot, particularly through the pandemic, that we're all in this together. Well, sometimes that loses its meaning because we hear it so often. But when it comes to recovery from religion or just questioning our faith or looking at where we're heading for our future lives, it is really true to say we're all in this together. We can all help one another. Now, we have, as Eric mentioned, a great back catalogue of blogs, podcasts, videos that are available, and they give a great demonstration of how we can basically be there to help heal and provide hope for one another. Now, the other aspect, I think Eric's best to talk about this, is the support groups.
You're just as good at talking about it as I am. Real quick on the podcast side of it, we now have a team who has been dedicating themselves to convert these RfRx shows into a podcast. And so if you just miss something and you don't really like doing the YouTube, you want to listen to it in the car, check out the podcast, of course. All right, support. We have peer support groups. There are currently 62 support groups around the entire world. And these are face-to-face meetings where we get the support group leaders, the really greatly trained and fantastically talented support group leaders, create an environment where we are able to come in there and kind of share what's been going, like how religion has hurt us, what kind of trauma we're struggling with, or doubts that we're going, that's coming up. And so these are the safe places to do it. And I don't know of any other type of program that can offer this type of safe space, even when it's not necessarily safe to talk about it, talk about these doubts or these concerns or this trauma to a religious community. We have that space set up, and we've got like I said, there's 62 groups around the world, and you can go to our website to find it, or they're on meetup.com. In addition to that, Sasha talked about the helpline. I talked about the support group program. Those are both peer support groups. So nobody is professionally trained through RfR to provide advice or diagnose medical issues. But many times we may need more than what just support groups can offer. And so we've set up the Secular Therapy Project. This is where therapists can come and apply, and they are vetted, heavily vetted, to make sure that they have their appropriate licensing in the state or their country, to make sure that they're maintaining a secular practice. So you won't go home having to, like, with the requests of like, oh, you need to pray on your problem harder. And they're also vetted to make sure that they're exclusively using evidence-based treatments. And right now we've got a ton of therapists on there, yeah, but we could always use more therapists. So if you know of a good secular therapist, let them know what the Secular Therapy Project does and encourage them to apply. You can set up your own account and hopefully search for a secular therapist near you at seculartherapy.org.
And that's a great thing you mentioned too, Eric, because we're looking at expanding this database of people worldwide. And here in Australia, we're starting to head up that with some qualified therapists in this part of the world, but we're looking to do that worldwide. So if you know of therapists who are interested in supporting people who understand religious trauma syndrome and things like that, let them know. We'd love to chat to them.
Absolutely. There's also another aspect or another program that we set up is the online community. And this is not a publicly accessible online community. This is kind of isolated, and people who are in there are vetted to make sure that to keep the community safe. And so if you're interested in talking to some people who are kind of going through some similar issues, let's say you are an ex-military or a current military service person, I blanking on the proper terms here, sorry. We have a channel in the online Slack community, the RfR online community, that you can join and meet and discuss some of your concerns and issues with other people who can relate to you that are also either ex or current military. If you're raising kids and trying to figure out how to do it in a secular way, we've got secular parenting, we have LGBTQ, we have ex-Mormon, ex-Islam, ex-Jehovah's Witness channels in there. So there's a lot of different channels where you can meet and talk to people who know what you've been going through, experience something similar, something that I might not be able to understand and relate to. So it's a pretty darn powerful community. If you're interested in joining that, go to the recoveringfromreligion.org website, chat with an agent or call in with an agent, and they'll ask you for a few questions to see if you're a good fit for the community. Now, if you are ready for the big time and kind of want to meet a fantastic community of people, of non-believers, to have discussions, to have debates, and to make some friends over there as well, you can check out the Atheist Community of Discord. And I'd love them over there. They've got fantastic moderators, excellent people over there. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the link into the chat. In fact, I'm monitoring the Discord channel over there. So hello, ACD, good to see you.
Yeah, welcome to everybody there.
What's next?
Oh, volunteering. So you've heard us talk all about the different aspects that RfR provides. Now that's only possible because like-minded people, really, great people have come together and volunteered their time and their effort to help others. There is something so powerful about being able to volunteer our time to help because we understand what it's like. So if you'd like to be part of this fantastic community, please feel free to go to the main webpage, have a look at the volunteering tab. You might be able to be available as an online chat representative, or maybe take some phone calls, or perhaps help us with our support groups that are happening all around the world. We'd love to have really like-minded, positive people that are here to support one another. So if you'd like to join the team, please feel free to drop an application in, and we'd love to invite you on board.
Excellent. All right. We're kind of rushing through this because this is going to be a big show, but let me tell you what the format's going to be. It's going to be just like every RfRx we've had. For the first hour, we're going to have a discussion about the topic. Today's topic happens to be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Woohoo!
AKA the Mormons.
The Mormons. And during that discussion, you're probably going to have a ton of questions. And if you do, type them into the chat, both here in Zoom or over in Discord. We'll collect them, and we will have a Q&A session after the discussion session. So that Q&A session will last about 20 or 30 minutes. Once we're done with that, we're going to bring on our fantastic executive director, Gayle Jordan, to kind of give her closing thoughts on what her impression was from this discussion. After that, we're shutting off the recording and opening up the lines, and hopefully our guests are going to be able to stick around for a little bit to kind of have some follow-up questions for you viewers to kind of talk and let them know what this meant to you and maybe share some of your own experiences. So that's the whole Hangout stuff, and we've got some excellent Hangout hosts that are going to take that part over as well. All right, so without further ado, let's kind of get on to the main event. I am going to introduce Shannon Grover. She was born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and was a model Mormon. If you think of Mormon, this is her. She went to church, held callings, went on mission, married in the temple, stayed home, and stuffed all of her doubts into a locked closet. 5 years ago, when the closet was so full that the door broke, she finally faced reality and just walked away. Now she's the co-host of the Glassbox podcast with Bryce Blankenagel, while she works to break free of the conditioning of church imposed on her.
Fantastic. Yeah, welcome, Shannon. And along with Shannon, we have Bryce Blankenagel, who many people will also be familiar with. And I personally am bit of a fanboy. I love the work that Bryce has done over the years in really helping to make known the truth about the Mormon faith. He was born and raised in the LDS Church and another model Mormon. However, as a teenager, Bryce became a little less satisfied with the answers to a lot of the questions and doubts that he had. And as mentioned with Shannon, the LDS faith expects people to just doubt their doubts before they doubt their faith. Well, Bryce didn't do that. At the age of 17, he stopped attending church and began to examine the religion that he was born into. And that takes real courage. That takes strength. So Bryce is also the co-host of the Glass Box podcast, along with Shannon, and also the host of the Naked Mormon podcast. And I know we've heard him and seen him on a wealth of other podcasts, both ex-Mormon and ex-religious. So welcome. It's great to have you both here.
Thank you.
Yes,
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we are happy to be here.
So when we were looking for some ex-Mormons to kind of cover this topic, your names both came up so often. And so we're really glad to have the fantastic people, the people who know this whole topic, to just show up and discuss this with us. I'm really grateful to have you here. I know this is a big topic, but where do we start? What about how you guys got out of it?
I'll take the lead on that because mine's really not interesting and fast. I did not like going to church when I was a teenager, and I stopped going to church. So I don't have a whole lot of the experiences that a lot of people do when they grow, that spend their whole lives in the church the way that Shannon does. It wasn't until a few years after I left the church that I got interested in the history of it and started podcasting and trying to educate people about it. But Shannon has a far more interesting story, so take us away.
Yeah,
Bryce,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Bryce, did you get to go on a mission?
No, I left it at 16, and when I was in, you left when you were 19. So I missed it. I dodged that huge life-changing bullet.
Guys left when they were 19. The women left when they were 21. Now it's a little bit different. Guys can go when they're 18, but still women go when they're 19, and it's still. But yeah, my story. Well, my story I could take a week telling you every single detail, but I really won't, because that's not fair to anybody. But like they said, I was a good little Molly Mormon girl, as we call it in Mormonism. And I was raised in the heart of Morador, which is the Mormon corridor. And this is the part of the United States that has the highest density of Mormons. So you're looking at Idaho through Utah, Arizona, parts of Colorado, that kind of stuff. Now, just know, by the way, we're going to have to give you definitions all the way through this, because Mormons like to change the meanings of words or change the names of things because they like to stand out as peculiar. So just, if there's one that we say that you don't understand, give us the high sign and we'll define it. But they do this because they really want you asking questions about the church. So, be prepared. Okay. So yes, I did everything. See, and the thing is, for me, is I was trying to stand out because I came from a very large family with a lot of strong personalities. So I was trying to stand out in my family. And so I was doing everything absolutely right. But see, there was also another underlying problem, and that is that I suffered from very severe depression and was told all the time, because this is what Mormonism taught then, it's all in your head. So nobody ever treated me. And just trigger warning, I will mention there were times that I was suicidal. And on one of those times, I was taken to see a bishop who told me, and at this point I was 20 years old, but he told me that, bishops, by the way, are the head of a congregation, like minister or pastor, but they call them bishops. But the bishop told me that the only reason that women in the church suffered from depression is because they committed a sexual sin. And he interrogated me for about 2 or 3 hours, trying to find out what sexual sin I committed, including trying to see if I had secret lesbian desires for my best friend. And when he was exhausting that line of inquiry, found there was nothing I had ever done wrong, then he said, you need to go on a mission because a mission will cure you. So I believed if I was really good and did every single thing the church told me to do and every single thing that a leader told me to do, that I would be okay. Now,
Shannon, that I'm sorry, I just need to
No.
break in and pass on. I think the disgust that everybody feels for what you went through there,
Yeah.
that is just appalling overstepping of appropriate boundaries. But I'm hearing a pattern that many of us who have left any form of religion could relate to. The fault was yours. You were to blame for whatever you were going through. It was never the church's fault or an external fault. It's always your fault.
Bingo. That's exactly it. So yeah,
Well,
I did
and
everything. Oh, sorry, Bryce, go.
I just want to pause. Shannon, can you spend a little bit of time on what bishops' interviews are often like for people, especially in your situation here? Because you said it was an interrogation, and I mean, for a lot of people, myself included, it is a hot seat. It's an inquisition. They do not hold anything back.
No, they don't. And of course, it depends on what your bishop is like, because it is bishop roulette. I know a bishop will hold the calling for about 5 years, doesn't get paid to do it. He has no qualifications to be put in that position. They just decide it because he makes enough money. So, because everything in the church is about money. So, yeah, he will take you in, and they start this when you're 12. So from the ages of 12 to 18, youth go in first. From 12 to 16, they go in once a year. They have a private meeting, just them alone with the bishop. And he asks them questions about things like, what's your testimony of the church? Are you reading your scriptures? Are you going to all the youth activities? Are you masturbating? Do you
They're
have
asking a 12-year-old this question?
They ask 12-year-olds this.
And this is one-on-one behind closed doors.
Behind closed
parents, up until recently, parents weren't even really allowed.
Right.
When I was 12, I knew how to joke about it, but I had no idea what it was.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I got asked about it and I didn't know what it was, but I could tell by the way the bishop asked that it was a bad thing. So I was like, no. And they believed me because I was Shannon. I was the good little girl. I played the violin and the cello, and I played in church, and I did everything they asked me to do. So they never really questioned me very strongly until, Shannon has depression.
So can I ask then, so here you're both raised in this environment where you believe you are in the one true faith. You don't see any of this behavior as being inappropriate because this is what God directs. This is the right way to act. So how do you progress to that point where you accept this, what we now see as improper behavior, and finally go, I think this isn't right? How do you get to that point?
It takes a lot, because one of the big things you're taught in the church is you always obey leadership. The prophet of the church will not lead the church astray. You're told this in the Doctrine and Covenants, which is one of the Mormon scriptures. The prophet will never lead the church astray. He will be removed from his place if he does, which I always wondered, what does that mean? Does that mean God's going to kill him? I mean, God does that in the scriptures all the time, so probably. But, that never happened. But also, you always, always, always do what the leader tells you, even when it's wrong. Because in judgment, if you obey the leader, even when he tells you something wrong, you will be blessed for your obedience. He will be punished for telling you something wrong. But if you don't do what he said when it's wrong, you will be punished even more than he will.
Wow.
I understand that and I relate to that. Coming from the JW background, it was the same thing. You go along with the leadership and God will sort it out if it's not right, but it's not your place to question things.
Right. Exactly. So, that's one of those things. But you're also being brainwashed, right, Bryce? I mean, the songs that you do, everything. But the other thing is Mormonism, it takes over every single part of your life. It controls everything. It's not just what you do on Sunday. It's not just what scriptures you read. It controls how often you pray, what you eat, what clothes you wear, even down to your underwear, what you decorate your body with, who your friends are, what you read, what movies you watch, the music you listen to, how you speak, where you worship, how you spend your money, who you marry, where you marry them, what kind of sex you have, what birth control you can use. I mean, every single thing in your life is controlled by Mormonism.
Shannon, that kind of almost sounds like a cult, because that seems to go through the Hassan Bite model of behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. It's kind of like you're in a cult.
It is exactly like you're in a cult.
I would also to further reiterate or further iterate this point, it is playing into the authoritarianism of it. Of course, it's an extremely male-centric patriarchal religion. Everything revolves around the priesthood. And this is the guy, this is the current guy running the church, Russell M. Nelson. Looks like a lovable character, doesn't he? Oh, rusty nails, right?
Yeah.
And the power structure, and this is probably a good time to kind of discuss briefly the power structure of the church, because as Shannon has coined, it puts the organized and organized religion. The hierarchy of Mormonism is extremely top heavy. Everything happens at the direction of this guy, the prophet Russell M. Nelson. And what it also creates is an extremely competitive environment for the men to rise to higher and higher ranks. And because of some odd quirks and features within the history of the church, it has become a gerontocracy. So the guy that you see here was called to be prophet, the supreme leader of the church, at the age of 91 years old.
Bryce,
and
can you define gerontocracy real quick?
Right. It is a power structure that is based on basically the elderly, the most seniority are the rulers of the organization. And as Shannon is sharing on the screen right now, you can see these are the hierarchies. You have the ward bishopric that's at the very lowest levels that kind of lord over the individual members. Then you have the stake presidencies and all the stake organization. And then you move up to the regional representatives, and then you go up to the 70s, and then to the quorum of the 12 apostles, and then the first presidency, of which the president, the prophet of the church, is the head.
Sorry, Bryce. Yeah. So can I ask, for somebody to aspire or to get up that ladder, they believe that's divinely appointed? They believe that that is led by Jesus himself?
Certainly. And it is based on the inner sense that most men have. And I say men because it's a very, very polar type of, binary religion, and it's very patriarchal. But most men aspire in the church to be a leader. They think, if I'm the most righteous and devout member, and if I do the most service, if I do my calling as hard as I possibly can, and I read my scriptures every day, then God will see the fruits of my labors, and God will call me to the bishopric, which once you get into the bishopric, that's kind of your entry path into this corporate ladder.
Before we
most people
go too far into this, Shannon, let's finish up your
sorry, kind of derailed there. Sorry about that.
This is all important. Don't be sorry. No, this is very important to understand, because gender roles in the church are hugely important. And, in every church, men and women are treated different. I don't know if there's any of them where they're treated equal. But in Mormonism, the difference is a canyon. And that's one of the things you just saw when we showed you this hierarchy, is no priesthood position is held by a woman. They're all held by men. And, these are leaders that are all powerful, all knowing, they do everything God says. And that's an important thing to remember, because particularly when you're a woman, whatever you're told, you must do. You cannot say no, or all sorts of things get held over your head. Women are very submissive when men talk. There's a lot of things that are very similar in our society, like apologizing too much and overcorrecting and all those stuff. But, you're conditioned all the way through to submit in certain ways. So throughout my life, all of that happened. But see, the other thing is I kept having doubts, and they all started when I was 10. And I had, just questions I would have. Now, in 1975, in an interview with Camilla Kimball, who was the prophet Spencer W. Kimball, it was his wife, she had said that anytime she doubted, she just put that doubt on a shelf and closed the door and forgot about it until, then she'd come back and find, oh, it's God. Well, no, they never disappear. So ex-Mormon community will talk about their shelf items, and they'll ask each other, what was your shelf item? I just kept stuffing things in this shelf till it turned into a closet. you know,
What
and it was
happens-
like that old Riley show. Yeah.
Yeah, Shannon, so what happens when that shelf finally gets too heavy and it breaks?
Then all of a sudden you are flooded with all of your doubts. So for me, there were things like Thomas Murphy, Dr. Thomas Murphy did some DNA studies, mitochondrial DNA on plant life, the wildlife, as well as the Native Americans found around New York, trying to prove if the church's claims that the Book of Mormon people, the Lamanites in the Book of Mormon, are the ancestors of Native Americans, proved they were not, and showed all this. He published all of this in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Church was not happy. They demanded that he retract it or they would excommunicate him. He didn't retract it, of course, because it's like, this is science. And that really bothered me because I was raised to think that the laws of science were the laws of God. And I thought, well, if he proved all of this scientifically, then, you know. And then I read the book called Lying for the Lord, which is about Paul H. Dunn, who was a big icon of my teenage years. I listened to every talk he gave. I went to every fireside I could. I bought his tapes. I bought his books. I listened to his stories because I always felt the spirit. And then I found out he made up his stories. He stole them from other people. He lied. And I was like, wait, why would I feel the spirit over a lie? And that bothered me a lot. So I decided, you know, let's do the scientific method here. And I decided to test it out.
So, Shannon, you giving yourself permission to do that was obviously a very brave thing to have to do, to allow yourself to investigate your doubts. But you weren't doing anything technically wrong, because I've got a quote here from President Reuben Clark, who said something that I think is brilliant. He says, if we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed. So that's one of the presidents himself going on record saying, just question whether it's the truth. Now, the reality is, are you able to do that?
No, you're not allowed to do that. In fact, Dallin Oates has said, what is it exactly that he said, Bryce? Dallin Oates, favorite person.
With regard to that, I'm not sure exactly. The only line from Oakes that sticks in my mind is that we do not give apologies.
Okay. You are not allowed to criticize the leadership, even when the criticism is true.
There it is.
That's the other one. Those two things are things he's even said recently. And what I did, because in Mormon church, the big meeting where everybody is there, you don't hear from the bishop. You actually hear from members, and they assign people to talk. And so I gave a talk one time. And I always love public speaking. That's actually one of the good things I got from the Mormon church, is a love of public speaking. And I had got everybody set, because the way I would give a talk is I would make my point, and then I would share a personal experience that illustrated the point. I always shared my own experiences. You know, I grew up with Paul H. Dunn doing that. Okay. So then once I had the whole audience listening, I used very specific words that made a very specific feeling in Mormons to create that feeling of the spirit, get all of their attention. And then I shared a completely, totally, beginning to end fabricated story. There was nothing. I didn't steal it from anybody else, parts of it, anything. It was completely made up. And I felt that frisson I always felt when I thought was the spirit, which I'm feeling right now talking about it. And that what was interesting with that is at Mormon church, people come to you and say, oh, that was a good talk today. But you know it was a good talk if they say something to you a week or even 2 weeks later. For the next 4 months, 17 Sundays.
Wow.
1 to 3 people would come up to me and say, Shannon, you know when you gave that talk and you told that story, I think I'm the one who needed to hear it, because this is what's been going on with me. And I was like, it's all fake. And this was like 2012, 2013, something like that. So at that point I thought, okay, I can be a nuanced member. I'll just, you know, I didn't want to rock the boat with anybody. I have very strong TBM, true believing Mormon family members. But then November 15, policy, the November 2015 policy. Bryce, you want to tell them about it?
Yeah, so the church has vacillated. I don't know if vacillated is the right word. The church has tried to assert its dominance in the political sphere when it comes to any bills or Supreme Court rulings related to LGBTQ issues. And the church has a long history of being on the wrong side of every social issue, and this just happens to be its hobby horse lately. So back in 2006, it was Prop 8, where the church funded an ungodly amount of money, indirectly. So members through individual contributions funneled like something like $40 million into this campaign in California to try and get an amendment passed that said that the state constitution required that marriage is between a man and a woman. And they put a ton of time and effort and money into getting this passed, and it passed. And it was there was a referendum on it because the language was confusing, and it was a huge debacle, a huge nightmare. And a lot of that caused a mass exodus because a lot of people didn't realize that the church was as bigoted as literally funding bigoted legislation. So November 2015 rolls around, and there was a leak that came out about the church's stance and perspective and the new guidelines that they were about to release about members of the church who are LGBTQ+. And the leak came out that they were going to basically punish the children of the like gay parents or lesbian parents or something to that effect. And in response to this leak coming out, the church actually issued a public statement just a week or two later, and they clarified the guidelines. And essentially what they said is that children couldn't be members of the church, they couldn't be baptized as members of the church until they quote unquote disavowed their parents if these parents are gay. So that caused a massive backlash, and it caused indeed a mass resignation on Temple Square, where over 1,000 people got together. There was a lawyer there, Mark Nagel, because you have to have a lawyer and a notarized signature with a photocopy of a state ID in order to resign from the church. So a lawyer was there, and he was just putting together all the paperwork to get all of these people to resign en masse. And it was just this huge PR shit show that the church totally flubbed up. But it caused what is known in the Mormon, ex-Mormon, and the broader Mormon culture as the November 2015 policy, because of just how poorly it was handled and just how bigoted it was. And of course, just a mere 3 years later, the new prophet takes over the helm, Russell M. Nelson, and he reverses this decision. So it was very, very egg on their face, a huge mistake, and caused a lot of pain and anguish within the LGBTQ plus community and the allies that live in Utah and have a deep personal connection to this, yours truly included.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that the Mormon Church has a history of bigotry when it comes to LGBTQ rights, misogyny, so we said homophobia, racism? Are all of those things something that has defined the history of the church?
That really comes down to a matter of perspective, doesn't it? Because no member, chapel attending member would say such a thing. But I'm happy to go through, large doctrinal changes and when they took place in the history of the church, and can document the social pressures that led to the leadership changing a policy or a doctrine or certain aspects of their practices because they couldn't withstand the social pressure, because social pressure clearly works.
Right. So most Mormons, we would say individual members, are honest people with a genuine heart. They're not necessarily bad people. We're not having a go at the Mormon followers as such. But these things that you allude to come from up top.
Well, and it's also a matter that people who are participants within a system that's larger than themselves can be unconscientious participants in the worst aspects of that system, right? Like, I'm a white American. I try and be as anti-racist as possible, but by virtue of being a white American, I'm participating and a member of an extremely racist society. Right. And members of the church, and, regardless of whether or not, people, white people living in America see that, it is still the case. And same with Mormons in the church. They may not see that they are members of a bigoted institution or that they hold to these religious tenets that are damaging and harmful. However, they are unwitting participants in it. There are some who are aware of these issues who will, they'll call themselves like a nuanced Mormon, or they will a cafeteria Mormon, where they just, kind of pick and choose the beliefs that they want, or they stay for the community, or whatever the case is. And they are aware of these issues, but nonetheless are participants in it.
Because it's like in 1978, they finally let Black people have the priesthood, Black men, I should say.
And let them into heaven, right? That's what that means.
Yeah.
Is this where we make reference to that repulsive expression from the Book of Mormon, where
Yes.
one is white and delightsome?
And black and loathsome, which is still
Ugh.
there. Yeah, it is still there. They say they've removed those references and stuff, but they haven't. They removed them from the introductions to each chapter in the Book of Mormon, but those introductions weren't even written until about 1981 by Bruce R. McConkie. Those aren't original to the Book of Mormon. The black and loathsome and all that stuff still is there. And it's going to take a lot. It's going to take somebody in leadership willing to say, okay, this was wrong. Yeah, it's wrong. Okay, we admit it shouldn't have been done, but this is the way it should be. But see, here's the thing too, that you have to look at with the overall picture of this. It doesn't matter that was common at the time period to feel that way. If it really is the one true church of God, it would have started the right way from the beginning.
Yeah, that's kind of like, as if I was a church member and I discovered or was alive when these changes were being made, I would kind of have to think, is God changing their mind? Because this is a complete separate flip from where it was before. Like it's 1978 decree. Like, okay, it just seems like this God is now fickle, and
Right.
and that's kind of scary, because it's not at all what I would want it to be. A black and white, and a plan is going forward, and things like that.
Eric, that's a really good point, because it shouldn't take the evil world under the control of the devil, i.e. everybody who is not part of the one true faith, to help move the change within the chosen organization that God's using.
And that's one of the things you have to look at with this is, but Mormons teach this, I don't know what other religions do, but that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And I'm like, okay, then you got to start as you mean to go on, or be willing to say, okay, God changed his mind or something. I don't, but
I don't know.
it's frustrating.
Yeah.
The
And I see a lot
dissonance.
it's
Sorry,
not
go
just a Mormon issue either. I see this through so many different types of, like the progressive Christian churches have done the same thing. And it's almost like, I'll have to be honest, it almost seems like a very directed an intentional marketing type of thing. Oh, we're losing members because of X, so let's have a prophecy or a something be handed down from God so we can keep our members and keep the money coming in.
It's the money right there. You brought it up.
Yeah.
Because this is why I call Mormonism an MLM, right, Bryce?
So Shannon,
Fitting. It's accurate.
You had given a speech in church, and how did you kind of finally come out, and where did you kind of find yourself after that?
What had helped is that in 2011, we found out I had cancer. And so going through cancer treatment meant I couldn't go to church. And oh, darn. And I couldn't go to the temple. Oh, no. So I got away from the brainwashing, which helped a lot. And I was taught to think and to analyze things and everything else. And so pulling back and looking at it from a little bit more of a distance helped a lot. So then by the time all of these things happened and my door, my Pandora's closet, as I called it, broke open, And I finally had to really look at all of those doubts. I thought, you know what, it's really not worth it. And I just walked away. But it wasn't that easy to do immediately because of where we lived. Fortunately, because we'd lived in this one apartment for 10 years and I was very entrenched in the ward congregation there. But we also moved 10 or 15 minutes away, which means we were like 2 states away, because this is Utah. And Mormonism, Salt Lake determines the boundaries of a ward and the stake and all that stuff. But anyway.
Real quick, Shannon,
yes.
Why weren't you able to go to church being treated for cancer? I mean, I would imagine if they really wanted to, they would bring your medicine into those pews or chairs or what have you. Still have you listen to it.
Right. Well, because you're completely destroying your immune system under chemo. And so I was like, great. I don't really like going to church anyway. So
Okay.
Not to be there.
Well, it's a great point that you raised, Shannon, and we hear this with people who are coming out of any religious organization. Once the supply of indoctrination is cut off, the regularity of attendance, the continual regurgitation of material that you hear on a daily basis or week in, week out, once that's cut off, it allows your mind to think. You're out of that echo chamber. So for you, it's terribly unfortunate that it coincided with a serious health situation, but that gave you the breathing space, so to speak, to be able to get out of the echo chamber?
Yeah, it did. Because you also, when you're faced with death like that, and it's not the first time I've faced death, but it's the first time I really looked at it clearly. I could look at life and everything else, and I had to really think about, what do I really believe? Do I believe all this garbage that keeps getting shoved down my throat? When I already know depression is not caused by sin, and it's a chemical imbalance in my head that I don't have any personal control over, those kind of things. But, walking away and looking at it more clearly helped a lot. Moving to a new place helped, because then it made it easier. I still run into issues. It's been, 2016. The conditioning in me is very, very, very strong. And it's something I have to think through responses to any given situation. It's like Christmas 2019, before the Christmas program, the bishop of the ward we were in came to talk my husband into going to it, because my husband at this point had left the church as well. And they all blamed me for him leaving, because I left first, and it's always the woman's fault. But he was here at my house. I could hear through the tone of my husband's voice how angry he was. So I went in to try to diffuse the situation. So the bishop decided to leave, and he asked my husband if he could give him a hug. Then he came to me. I put my hand out to shake his hand. He ignored it, and he hugged me. Full frontal body hug, rubbed his hand up and down my back. I wasn't prepared for that.
Just hearing the story.
I was not prepared for that at all. And I just stood there and took it. And afterwards, I started shaking and I was crying. And my husband was like, why didn't you say something? I said, I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. This was my norm. Normally I would have allowed it because he's the bishop, he's the leader, and all that shit. And, since then I've thought through how I would respond to that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't ready then, and it's the conditioning. Yeah. And so I have to think about, if I'm wearing something like this at the grocery store and I run into an old bishop, how am I going to respond when he looks at me and says, why aren't you wearing your garments, Shannon? And I'll have to, and I'm ready.
What? I'm just like, what other context in the world would you run into somebody that you barely know and they ask you about your underwear at the
right?
Grocery store.
Yeah.
It's a weird world.
It is, and I've had to practice in front of the mirror to be ready, to be able to look at him and say loud in my public speaking voice, why are you asking me an inappropriate question about my underwear? But I have to practice to be ready.
So that's an excellent tip.
Yeah, you make a really powerful point that you can mentally disconnect and you can mentally check out of a religious faith, in this case, the LDS faith. You can see academically where it's wrong, but emotionally it still has that triggers. And emotionally, we still, because of indoctrination, feel like we're obliged to have to answer to those in a position of authority. How do you recommend people become empowered to get to that point where they can step out and no longer feel victim to inappropriate behavior.
One thing is to practice. And that's what I've had to do. I've had to think through different scenarios of stuff I know will happen because it has. And I have to practice with myself and try to change that Pavlovian conditioning. But also, the biggest thing is never, ever, ever, ever kick yourself to death for not responding the way you wish you would. That's the hardest part. That's the one that's been the hardest for me, because I kicked myself to pieces after that bishop hugged me. And
folks like the bishop know what they're doing, and they know when to take you off guard and leave you speechless. It's a game that they play all of the time, and it's something a person like you in a lower caste or what have you, lower part of the hierarchy, isn't necessarily prepared for and trained to do. It's Shannon, thanks for sharing that. That was really fantastic.
I kind of want to take that as a bit of a jump off point, that we've thrown around the big scary C word in the conversation a little bit before. And, Sasha, I believe you're ex-Jehovah's Witness. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you referenced Stephen Hassan's bite model, and Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as the Mormon Church, definitely check a lot of the boxes within that very handy criteria. I understand whenever I'm interacting with Mormons, especially friends and family, people who I have a personal connection to, that I feel like I want to shake them by the shoulders and be like, "Do you realize what you believe in?" And as if that would work, right?
Right.
But I understand the amount of conditioning that they've gone through their entire lives, because I went through it to a certain extent. I was able to break free as a teenager. But that's through so many factors that were largely out of my control. My bishop roulette that I got was, pretty standard. It wasn't terrible, wasn't horrible, wasn't too authoritarian. And then, my parents as well were very understanding and very tolerant of my sister. I have one sibling, my sister, and I not wanting to go to church anymore. Had I been raised in a different family, a more authoritarian style of family, maybe I wouldn't have left the church. And then when Shannon is going to run into her bishop one day at the grocery store, and he's going to do the garment check and just quickly look and, ask, why aren't you wearing your underwear? It's like, why would somebody ask another person about their underwear in the market? But it's also important to recognize that bishop has gone through an extremely similar mind shaping process. It's not mind washing or brainwashing. It is a mind shaping process. From birth, you grow up inside of this culture with all of its traditions and practices, and more importantly, with its power structures. And the people who grow up in it, especially the people who get to leadership positions, are oftentimes going to be the people who have given themselves over to the mind control of the system more so than anybody else has. I tend to try and view those people with as much empathy and grace and compassion as possible, because they are not operating under a system where their locus of control is internalized and their own. They're operating with a worldview that everything that they do, everything that they see, everything that they think, all has to be filtered through the lens of the cult. That explains why they do what they do. That bishop, yeah, he's being creepy, but it's because he's been conditioned to be creepy by the creepy bishops that were his creepy bishops his entire life, and on the chain goes.
He thinks it's normal. So
he knows it's normal, and the culture says that it's normal. So why wouldn't it be normal?
And this is in particular Utah as well. Yeah.
Right. And powerful point too, that if people adopt a certain behavior or way of thinking or acting, that wasn't through facts that got them to that. That was emotion, that was control, that was influence, that was indoctrination. So it's pointless to try and use facts to get somebody out of that when it wasn't facts that got them into that. So I really love your point that you both make there about being kind and empathetic and supporting. If we just jump in and we attack the beliefs and try and point out the doctrinal flaws from the such and such letter and this and that, that's possibly going to cause that doubling down or that rebound effect on people. So how do you advise reasoning with loved ones or family members who are in that situation?
Oh, God. I'm still working that out with mine. Oh my God.
I can tell you, you don't start an anti-Mormon podcast. That's the absolute fucking worst thing that you could do if you want to start productive conversations with your friends and family.
Let's Sasha, that's a fantastic question. Let's kind of save that towards the end, kind of wrap up with that. But Bryce, you did really talk about like the some of the specific beliefs, and we've brought up the underwear, we've brought up gender roles, and so let's kind of talk about what sets this religion apart from all of the others. Like, what is unique to Mormonism that you don't really find in others? And it sounds like underwear is kind of a popular topic, both in my mind and here in the chat.
Shannon, you said peculiar people earlier. Explain that a little bit. That's a great jump off point.
Oh, you might do a better job of it. It's in one of the articles of faith that we are a peculiar people, you know, and you think of all the meanings of that word, basically a people to set ourselves apart from everybody else so that we're different. And
that's based upon a scripture too. That's because JW's used the same thing. They're based on people peculiarly his own, God's own. Yes.
Right. And I mean, yeah, it does create a missionary moment, because then people are like, wait, what do you mean about this? What is this? What is this? And it opens the door for you to do it, because, you know, every member is supposed to be a missionary. It's kind of, the JWs do it a little bit differently than Mormons do, but I mean, it's essentially the same thing. Yeah.
I was going to say that the thing that everybody knows Mormons for, of course, is the Book of Mormon, whether the play or the physical book, which the play is excellent, right? I don't know if anybody here has seen it, but it's, if you know Mormon culture and all the jokes and the culture that they get right in that play, it's truly excellent.
And Bryce, is this where we could also launch into maybe a medley of the South Park theme song? Dum, 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 dum.
Yes, and I will also say that was my first real shelf item. And then I watched Bill Maher's Religulous, and I was like, oh shit, wow, all religion is wrong. Okay, that's easy. I solved that question. So that was really the sum total of my transition out of the church story. But within this concept of the peculiar people, they have the Book of Mormon. They also adhere to the Bible, but of course they have to say, as far as it is translated correctly, which gives all sorts of outs or contradictions that are available in the Bible that, you know, atheists always talk about in the Bible, you know. So they have that. And then they also have the Doctrine and Covenants, and then the Pearl of Great Price. And these are their 4 holy books known as the Quad. And when you go to church, you bring your quad or you bring your sticks with you. So these books have different various purposes and fascinating histories that I don't think we're going to have time to get into. Maybe that's for the Q&A, or not Q&A, but like the after party. But within all of this too is the different history of Mormonism, because it's new. Right, similar with Jehovah's Witnesses and Charles Taze Russell, right? Like, dude lived like 5 generations ago, and there's a lot of documents about him. And it's like he was a con man, like most religious leaders. But Joseph Smith lived in, you know, he was born in 1805, and there's just a ton of documents about him. And Mormons are incessant record keepers too, so they kept all their books, they kept journals, they kept all sorts of documents. And it's like, why would you write that down ever?
Right?
Why, William Clayton? Why would you write in your journal about when polygamy was introduced, you're having a menage a trois with your wife and your mother-in-law? Why would you write that in your journal? So the amount of documents that are available to Mormonism are often used as a bit of a case study, a comparative religious history, So you can see the genesis of a religion and of a charismatic figure, and then of course the ever necessary person who follows up the charismatic leader, that is the pencil pusher, the businessman that follows him up,
It's
that
always the
is able
second
to
one.
bring the church into success. A
Yeah.
lot more is on the second one to make sure that they get the religion rolling and they grease all the gears. The charismatic guy has to get everything rolling, and I say guy, I know that's there's a lot of trappings with using that, but I say it because it is so very generalized and so close to absolute as far as the world religions that we know about. While there are plenty of exceptions, the Public Universal Friend and Joanna Southcott and so on and so forth, these contemporaries of Joseph Smith that even have followings to this day. But these visionary charismatics start a religion. They're the ideas person, and then the business person follows them up and perpetuates that religion. And then you see how many documents are available to early Mormon historians, and you can use that as a bit of a comparative to many other world religions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We see that. So Joseph Smith starts it, and then along comes the next guy who's more authoritarian, structures the religion. JW's had Charles Taze Russell, but it was actually Rutherford who came along as the authoritarian that pushed the religion. We think of that with Scientology. We had the ideas man of L. Ron Hubbard, but it was Miscavige that kind of directed it. So was that the same with Mormonism? It kind of got its momentum and structure from those that came after Joseph Smith?
Absolutely. And what's interesting too is Joseph Smith, when prior to his death, right? So this guy is such a fascinating figure, and right, like Naked Mormonism is a serialized history of just his life, and it's over 200 episodes of just this one guy, right? He only lived to be 39 years old. He only was a prophet, so to say, for 14 years. But the story is just endlessly fascinating. But at the time of his death in 1844, he left no less than 7 different successors at different times in his life. So what that caused is what I refer to as the schism grenade. So his death caused multiple factions of the church to blow off in all sorts of different directions. And the 2 largest competitors in this were James Strang and Brigham Young. James Strang tried to keep on the visionary Mormonism and the more ritualistic and the more spiritualistic side of Mormonism. And he was assassinated by a cop because he stole a couple guys' wives. Weird how that works. But then Brigham Young, of course, takes the Mormons out to Mexico, where they're not bothered by anybody. And they create their own settlement out there. And the federal government is happy to let them do that, because what the Mormons are doing is they are unlocking the West for European American expansionism. So the Mormons have this little pocket of area that they are able to grow and flourish and take over a bunch of land by wholesale committing genocide to all of the natives that lived out there. And they also created what's known as the Perpetual Immigration Fund. And that was basically a program that Brigham Young, this pencil pusher guy that has 4 worldwide universities named after him, set up this immigration program that brought Mormon converts straight from Europe all the way to Utah. And it was a very streamlined and fast and very cheap process that he was able to streamline. So, Utah itself became, oddly enough, a bit of a eugenics experiment, with the Mormons growing and flourishing, having a constant influx of white Europeans while they were simultaneously committing war on all fronts against the Native American and indigenous peoples. So with an area like that and the economic economic pressures of the gold rush bringing so many resources through Utah, the Mormon church couldn't help but flourish with the help of that guy, Brigham Young.
How familiar are the average Mormon members of that part of the history? You talked about some of the genocidal behavior. Mountain Meadow Pass might be an example of that, or as they were going out and furthering their community. How familiar are the average Mormon of those troubling aspects of their history?
That's probably a better question for Shannon, because I left before I was an adult, right? So I didn't go to gospel doctrine class and to elders quorum to high priest. Like I didn't get to participate in all that.
What we were taught is that Brigham Young was the man who saved the church, who got everybody to Utah away from all of those people trying to kill the Mormons, and that he loved Native Americans, and he was the one who just made everything better. That's what we were taught. We didn't see anything bad. You know, we weren't taught anything bad. Mountain Meadows massacre wasn't his fault. It was somebody else's fault. It was
Wow.
other people that were bad people. That was their fault. It wasn't Brigham Young. You know, those
So
kind of things.
was there a
Hold on,
persecution?
Mountain, hold on. You said Mountain something massacre. And
That's another whole.
you can't just go past that without saying what the massacre is.
Yeah.
Just briefly, of course.
Bryce, you
Yeah.
probably better explain that better than me.
So this is a massacre, and the reason why even chapel attending Mormons have heard about this, even if they don't know the story very well. But it was the largest massacre of European Americans in American history, because it was wrong place at the wrong time for a wagon train that was headed through Utah to California at a time when the Mormons thought that the federal government was going to invade their state and unseat Brigham Young from his throne of governor. And Brigham Young didn't like that. And these poor folks were the unwilling recipients of a Mormon siege that lasted for 5 days, and then a massacre.
Okay.
And it's like, it's horrible. It's disgusting. It's very biblical, you know, taking babies and smashing their heads on the wagon wheels. And it's horrible. I tend to try it's religion, right? What do you expect? I try to minimize the importance of the Mountain Meadows massacre, because when it's viewed within the context of the many indigenous massacres that occurred over the period of basically 1849, 1850, all the way up until 1858, those were a series of what were called wars by Brigham Young, but were just you know, slaughter by slaughter. Hundreds of natives were massacred in multiple fronts. The Timpanogos massacre, of course, being huge, where they actually sent skulls, decapitated heads to Columbia University to be studied after they killed these folks. The Bear River massacre, over 450 dead indigenous peoples, men, women, and children. So the Mormons, they murdered thousands of people. People talk about Mountain Meadows massacre because it was like the largest white people slaughter in American history.
So did they feel that because they had God on their side, it was okay because these were just, you know, subhumans that they were attacking? Is this part of the culture that somehow, being divinely appointed, they had the right for this sort of behavior?
That's pretty loaded. That's really loaded, and I don't think that there's a bedrock on that question.
I apologize.
And that might be something better to explore in the after party. But needless to say, there are a lot of reasons that people will use to justify murdering somebody, especially entire groups of people. And when you have a religion that has holy books that call these people, like, you know, the cursed ones, basically, there are more justifications for that kind of behavior.
We have a comment in the chat calling it manifest destiny, and it seems to fit perfectly with the early church. And from what I understand, the church was born in the burned over counties in Pennsylvania, and they were or New York or something like that, and they were kicked out and had to go. They literally were kind of kicked out and forced to go to Utah. And along the way, they got in some fights and killed even more natives and more people too, just getting there to Utah.
Yeah,
they started shit all over the place, it seems like.
Yeah. And then when that was not enough, they went to war with the federal government. It was a Cold War, and ended up being settled. And then, of course, the president got blamed for it. It's called Buchanan's blunder. But then the Civil War kicked off, and Lincoln said, if Brigham Young will let us alone, then I don't intend to bother him. So, that just gave the Mormons another decade and a half, essentially, of flourishing completely unhindered.
Right. You made a comment earlier too about persecution complex, that the religions sort of really seem to have a bit of a foundation on that, as many fundamentalist faiths have. Can you expand a bit more on that?
They really do. And it's important to religions, I think, to have that persecution complex, because then they feel like their church is being picked on because it's the only true church. Joseph Smith, the church members claimed that Joseph Smith went through all sorts of persecution over having his first vision. Well, he wouldn't have, because everybody had visions in that time period. There's no contemporary accounts of him being persecuted. But it's like the persecutions that Mormons went through, especially, Joseph Smith, Bryce can tell you stories about all of his, actually. Mormons believe it's because he was God's prophet, but the real reason is vastly different.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting you talked there about visions and so on too, and a lot of the faiths that got their start at that time period had that very magical worldview, that understanding the worldview that people had in the 19th century. They believed in folk magic, divining rods, visions, second sight, which is why the foundation was kind of ripe for a faith like that, I guess.
Certainly. And to a certain extent too, it's interesting to see the evolution of the church through that lens, to understand the folk magic past that it actually carries with it. And I've done some personal research that some of those visionary experiences are actually, I attribute them to the use of psychedelics and witching ointments. But to see the transition of the church, obviously under Brigham Young, became this authoritarian structure. And the church, I believe, ever since has been comprised of a membership who I call spiritually starving, because the early church is wacky. Under Joseph Smith's leadership, it's fun. There's just crazy shit going on. He's going to war with this state, and then he's getting kicked out of that state, and then his leadership are trying to assassinate him, and it's just fun and goofy and wacky, and it's yakety sax is playing the whole time, the whole 14-year ministry of his church. But then Brigham Young comes along, and it's terrifying what the church becomes. And I am very much of the opinion that if Mormons today grew to study and understand the church's roots and the true roots of the ritualism that they have built into the temple practices, into the handshakes that they make, into the various the symbolism that is constructed into the temples, and that contributes to the layout of Salt Lake City itself, then they would be, I think, a lot more interesting. They would carry a lot more interesting faith with them, and they wouldn't be in this space of spiritual starving. But as it stands right now, the religion is, you follow the rules, you go to temple, at least once a month, you go to church every Sunday, and that ritualism without any spiritualism just becomes repeating the same old shit, and people get tired of that. But Shannon, you broke away because you were no longer forced to go to the church, and your shelf was getting really heavy. It was a closet at that time. Well, COVID has caused every Mormon to stop going to church for a year. So in my opinion, it's going to be very interesting to see the evolution of the church from now forward, to see how they kind of pick up the pieces.
His temples are open back up now, and so people can go back to the temple. But
Right.
for a while there, last year, you could only do a live endowment, which means you were taking it out for yourself, not doing it for a dead person. But that was
jargon.
yep.
How-
Yeah, so let's suss through that. The holy place that the Mormon or the LDS meets is called a temple. Is that correct?
Temples are fun. Oh my God. Okay. There are so many temples. And going through the temple, the biggest thing about temples is you're doing work for the dead. Mormons think they have the right to baptize into their church people who are already dead. It's caused huge amount of problems when they've gone through and baptized Holocaust victims, and that's hit the news more than once.
Fucking
Anne
horrible.
Frank has been done. I don't know how many times people have taken her name in and done it. I mean, people get done multiple times. So in the temples, what you're doing essentially is just more covenants. And these covenants are important because it gets you into the top level of heaven. And only people who've gone through the temple and lived up to these covenants and everything can get into that level of heaven. And we probably should talk about that, huh, Bryce? Or should we?
Yeah.
And does this also tie
Okay.
in with once you attain to heaven, you get your own planet and the family
Yeah.
stays together eternally? You can't ever be unbound from that marriage. Can you expand on some of those
Well,
things?
real quick, I remember, like, I'm a genealogist. I do a lot of genealogy research, and I know that all of these Mormons will baptize long dead folks who they think they're related to, and it cracked me up because some well-known Mormon's father died, like Mitt Romney's father died, or somebody's father died, and the Satanic Church decided to baptize their father into the Satanic Church, and they were so fucking pissed. It cracked me up just to see the juxtaposition. But
the funny thing is, when I was on my mission, I actually tracked it out, which is the door knocking. Mormons call it tracting. These people that they invited us in, so of course we were very excited. And then she showed us these pictures of her visit to Salt Lake City for one very specific purpose. And it's when she got to the visit to Temple Square and showed the baptismal font for baptizing the dead. And she said, "Why did you do that? You do not have the right to do it." And just hammered us over it. And my companion, she didn't have any clue what to say. And I remember, and I look back on this and I think, this was pretty good, all things considered. But I said, if you don't believe any of this is true, then why do you care? And in some respects, it's like, it doesn't matter if there's no next life, it doesn't matter. But it's still, there is such a disrespect, because here's the thing. Anybody in the ex-Mormon community who's had their name removed, their family can rebaptize them after they die.
Oh, wow. So speaking of the next life, you had a great screenshot there, I think, Bryce. Could you share that with us again to show how they believe people go? And can you guys explain that for us, perhaps some who can't see the screenshot?
Pre-existence, that's your pre-earth life. That's where we had the big war in heaven to decide on whether we wanted free agency or not. Those who chose
big
free
war
agency.
in heaven?
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
a big deal to Mormons. They call it pre-existence,
Well, that's
mortal
because
life.
Satan and Jesus are brothers. Like
Yes,
actual
Lucifer
blood
and
brothers.
Cast
Jesus.
out. Now that
Yeah.
happened in 1914, right? Didn't it? Oh, no,
Right.
sorry, that's a JW thing. But yeah.
Right. And it was, God's plan was to give us free agency. Lucifer's plan was to make all of us do everything right, and then everybody goes back. All of us here chose free agency. So that's why we're here on earth. But see, you go through that veil of forgetfulness, so you forget everything that happened before to come to earth.
Oh.
Here you're born, you have to grow up. If you're a really good person in your pre-earth life, then you get to be born into a Mormon family. But if you weren't, you're born into a black family.
Oh,
I'm not kidding you.
Literal?
This is what we were literally taught.
oh,
Wow.
Like the mark of Cain or something.
Yeah,
or-
that kind of thing. Or you're put into, a country like India or China or someplace where the church isn't. Yeah.
So then earthly life is just a trial run, is it? Or just
Trial run. Everything has to do with what comes next, where
And
you die,
also,
then you go to the spirit world. And there,
to be fair, there's another detail in this as well.
Yes.
If you are somebody who you were super duper righteous
Right.
in the pre-mortal existence, then you are given a body that you Shannon, how do I put this delicately? You're given a body where you aren't subject to many of the same temptations that that other people aren't. And what I mean by that is, like, church leaders have said that people who are born with disabilities, that they are like must have been extremely
kidding me?
valiant in the
Wow.
pre-mortal existence. because
Yeah.
they
And-
they aren't able to choose to like get baptized for themselves, or they're not able to choose to like get the priesthood or do these things because they are so blessed that they just get basically a golden ticket, a free pass to the celestial kingdom.
The other part of that is children who died before the age of 8.
That too, yeah.
Mormons don't baptize children until they're 8, and they don't baptize dead children at all. They don't do baptisms or any of the covenants for the dead for children, because they say children get to go to exaltation, which I'll get to that in just a minute. But yeah, earth life, this is where you're supposed to make all your covenants and do all those things, get through the temple and everything. So when you die, you go to the spirit world, which is, I think, Catholic, almost like Catholic limbo. But this is where you're sitting. It's divided in half. There's spirit world, spirit prison. But when missionaries are teaching, they don't talk about spirit prison. Spirit prison is everybody who hasn't accepted the gospel. Everybody in the spirit world is preaching to those who haven't, in spirit prison, so they can get a chance to accept it, since people on earth are going to go do their, stuff for them, their covenants. Yeah. So then,
wow.
Yeah. So you have the resurrection, which most of that has to do with Christ coming back. They talk about there's the millennium. Mormons love the millennium. They talk about the millennium all the time, where Christ comes to earth. Satan is bound for 1,000 years. Christ rules here. Then at the end, Satan is loose. You have the Battle of Armageddon, then Judgment Day, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Millennium's important, and I'll get back to that in just a minute. So you have final judgment. Final judgment decides where you're going to go. Mormon heaven isn't heaven and hell. No. You've got levels, different kingdoms. So celestial kingdom's at the top. Terrestrial kingdom is in the middle. Telestial kingdom is the bottom. Only people who've gone through the temple can get into the celestial kingdom at the top.
Can you define those for us? Celestial, terrestrial, telestial.
Yeah. And, celestial's the best of the best. And terrestrial are basically good people. So, you get, but that are believing Christians kind of thing, so Baptists.
That's where all them
really
Jehovah's Witnesses are going.
Yeah.
Oh, we get to join you. Oh, okay.
Oh, there you go. And Mormons and that are just didn't do the temple stuff, or did the temple stuff but didn't quite live up to the covenants like they should. But they
so it's a lesser heaven.
Yeah.
A lesser version of heaven, but still somehow heaven. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, the telestial, the lowest one, is where the bad people go. So you get people like Hitler in there.
So it's hell?
No.
No. Multiple church leaders are quoted saying that they have seen the telestial kingdom in a vision, and that it was so glorious that they would kill themselves to get there.
And people who commit suicide go there.
Which contributes to the suicide pandemic in Utah.
Yeah.
So even somebody as bad as a Hitler, as you mentioned, gets to go to this telestial kingdom, which the prophets say is still a pretty A-OK place to be.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
And then you have outer darkness. That's where Satan and the third of the host of heaven that followed him were banished to. So, of course, Satan and that third of the host don't get bodies. That's the important thing there. And they're the ones that, they're really mad at all of us who did. But, there's all those devils that other religions talk about. Anybody who denies the Holy Ghost or denies Christ or commits the unforgivable sins, and that kind of varies, but most of that has to do with sex in Mormonism. They go
or
to
apostasy. Apostasy. So Shannon,
really
Bryce,
bad
we're all going to be
apostasy.
there.
Probably me, but not Bryce,
Shannon,
because I went through the temple. He did not.
Yeah. That's well, but also you don't necessarily, I don't think you actually have to go through the temple if you just if you by your own definition know Christ, which in Mormonism it's the gospel. If you know the gospel and then become an enemy of it, or you become apostate, or a son of perdition, then that's where you go, is outer darkness.
Right.
And it varies on who they say is in there. Sometimes they say a lot. Well, most of them will say that Judas Iscariot is there because he knew Christ and knew what he did wrong. That kind of thing.
So can the baptisms that take place in the temple save somebody who's been banished to that place, to outer darkness? Can they be reclaimed from there?
If they choose to accept the baptism, yeah.
Well, so, and that's what the spirit world and the 1,000 years of probation are for, when Satan is bound, because the temple work that we're all doing for dead people, well, that's because Mormons love their genealogy, because they believe that they have to baptize and do the endowment, the temple ceremony, for every living human being ever.
Wow.
All billions of them, right? So when the millennium comes, that's when the spirits are going to wander around and mingle together on physical earth, and where people who haven't died yet on earth are going to be able to do all of the baptisms and all of the temple work for all of the spirits that are currently in spirit paradise or spirit prison. And at that point, those people or those spirits can choose to accept those ordinances, and then they'll go to one of the kingdoms, or they can choose to reject those ordinances, at which point they will go to outer darkness.
Right. Now,
This
one
is-
thing, it's so complicated. Yeah. Now, one
How
thing,
did this all get? Sorry, I'm
okay.
just trying to work out, how did this all get formed? There's no
Yeah.
scriptures of this. Like, where did this come
Nope.
from? Sorry, Eric. Go ahead.
No, that's kind of my question too. Like,
Yeah.
what problem does this solve?
I will tell you,
okay.
it's so complicated.
All right,
Because you
strap
also
in.
have to know there's levels in each of these. The
Oh my
celestial
gosh.
kingdom has the top level of it is the only one
This
with a
sounds
name.
like an IKEA, just like a horrible place to be.
Oh
I
my
just
You're
God.
trapped in a circle of
I trapped
maze.
it in a damn IKEA.
You know what? I talked to a reporter once a few years ago, and she says, "Wait, you're Mormon?" Of course, we went through all the, what wife are you and all that shit. And then she says, "I need to know, did Mormonism start MLMs or did MLM start Mormonism?"
The
like,
similarities.
They're one and the same. So, I mean, this is very much an MLM model, because the better you are, the higher you get up. Now, it's
Oh.
important to note exaltation is the top of the celestial kingdom, because the church leaders now are trying to roll back on this. We teach people they can become gods. Yeah, they do still teach that. But if you listen to all the words they say when they announce that now, they're saying people who go to the celestial kingdom can't become gods. They don't. It's the ones in exaltation that become gods. Everybody else in the celestial kingdom are servants to them. So the gods get to
God.
create their own worlds and all this. This is an important thing to remember too, because this is a really big shelf item for me.
Mm.
And it is the thing about children. See, when Joseph Smith started the whole children get to go and be exalted thing, the mortality rate, infant mortality rate was really high. This is still a thing. But they also would say that everybody has to do all of the covenants to get into the celestial kingdom. It's even in the Book of Mormon that even Christ, he being holy, should have need to be baptized by water to fulfill all righteousness. How much more need have we, being unholy, to be baptized, yea, even by water? I had to memorize that on my mission. I still remember
65
it.
times you've read this thing.
I was like, this is 30 years ago that I was out. I was out
Wow.
end of the 80s. So anyway, they say that what happens in the millennium is children that die before the age of 8 will be resurrected in the form they died in. And they will, if your parents lived a life worthy of exaltation themselves, they get to raise their child in the millennium so their child can do all the covenants. But if the parents
becomes a god.
Yes. So the parents, if they don't live a life worthy of exaltation, then they lose that child. That child goes to somebody else. Now, the reason why I bring this up, my first child only lived for 2 weeks. So the ramifications of that are so massive that it's hard for people to understand
Right.
without being in Mormonism or even having children. Bryce doesn't have children. Because one, you're made to feel guilty for mourning a child, because they're like, your child gets to be a god. Your child is so special. You were trusted by God to have this child. But then also, because everything that happens to you in Mormonism gets put in your records, especially anything that happens in a bishop's interview gets put in your records for bishop to bishop to bishop to see. If you lose at Bishop Roulette, they will hold that over your head. And that happened to me. So if a bishop would come to me and say, I don't believe you're actually paying a full tithe. I want to see all your bank statements for a year. And I said,
Holy
that's none of
fuck.
your business. Then I lost my child again. If the bishop says, are you and your husband having oral sex? And I say anything other than no, I've lost my child again.
So your grieving process was hijacked, and then on top of that, you are being your appropriate boundaries are being overstepped.
Emotional manipulation is the way this church works. And
Wow.
here's the other thing. My husband never went through any of that from anybody. It was just me.
Because you were just a woman? Is
I'm
that
just-
the way?
What if we look at it from the child's perspective? Like, what if the child, the family that the child is born into is just a horrible, like it's got an abusive father or abusive mother, or the siblings are just awful. From what I'm hearing, the child doesn't have a choice. Is that right? They're stuck
exactly
in
right.
this. This is I'm sold. Where can I sign up to become a Mormon? This is
I
want
amazing.
to be this. Yeah.
But that's a really powerful point you make, Eric. Why would somebody consciously choose? When we're looking at this, it sounds, excuse me, batshit crazy. But people do believe it. Millions. How many Mormons are there? Active Mormons. Millions upon millions believe this.
So
Because
one thing that makes this really tough is we are missionaries will say, don't cast your pearls before swine, give them milk before meat, because when you are getting your first or your second missionary discussion, they're talking about living together as a family forever. They're giving you the heart cells of things that sound really good. Do you want to be, do you love your spouse? Do you want to be with them for eternity? And it takes years before you unearth and uncover what all of the deeper nuances of this theology.
Right.
So what Shannon and I are doing here is expressing to all of you a very distilled version of what this theology is and what the culture is, and we're laying it all out before you. We are casting the pearls of Mormonism before this this community of swine that we are.
Oink, oink.
So that's the problem here is when you look at this in totality and discuss it over an hour period of time, it can sound nothing but batshit crazy. But when you're drinking it one thimbleful at a time, it begins. You get adjusted to the taste of the shit.
So in the modern age, sorry, Shannon.
I was gonna say, by the time you start hearing the really batshit stuff, you're already sucked too deep in.
Right. So how do we reconcile that with the modern age? Because I know JW's batshit crazy beliefs as well, but people get drawn in by all the lovely utopian things that are preached in those first few visits. I totally get that. But in this modern age of the internet and information being readily available, how do the Mormon Church, or how does the Mormon Church try and stop people from simply watching a video like this or doing some research outside of approved sources? How do they try and control that information?
The internet is bad. Don't listen to the internet. That's a lot of it. But that is one of the things, though, is because of the information age now, people are much more self-aware, and that's amazing, because the only way change really happens in the church is starting from the members at the bottom. And if you've got the members, more members being nuanced, saying this is fucked up, this is terrible, this is awful, this part is, and seeing it, they can force a change. Because it's like, I mean, but it's also a PR thing. I mean, the temple covenants, they used to have, Brigham Young put into the temple covenants a treasonous oath that people would have to go and avenge the lives of Joseph and Hiram Smith. It was taken out in the 1910s because it hit the news and it was this PR disaster. Right. But there also used to be, with the covenants that you made, is you had to also take a blood oath. I did when I went through, and because they didn't take it out till 1990, but you had to promise that if you talked about any of this, you would allow someone else to kill you.
What? Sorry, what?
You would say, I covenant that I will never reveal the first or second token of the Aaronic or Melchizedek priesthood with its accompanying name, sign, and penalty. Rather than do so, I would suffer my life to be taken. And you would
Jeez.
act out the different ones. There's this cutting your throat, cutting across your chest, and disemboweling you. The Lafferty brothers in 1984, that's how they killed their sister-in-law and niece. I mean, this
Wow.
is shit. But these are
Wow.
all things that were in there. Nowadays, people going through the temple, they're a lot more self-aware because of the information age, because information is so much easier to get. And because we have things like podcasts like Bryce's Naked Mormonism with 200 fucking hours explaining just how messed up Joseph Smith was, you know, and all of that, just that first 14 years. You have all of that information out there. So we get much more self-aware members. And I think it's the only way to stop it.
Can I share a quote from Elder Quentin Cook in 2012 at the General Conference? So that's your annual or every 6 monthly conference, biannual. Some have immersed themselves in internet materials that magnify, exaggerate, and in some cases invent shortcomings of early church leaders. Then they draw inaccurate conclusions that can affect testimony. Any who have made these choices can repent and be spiritually renewed. Basically, don't look on the internet. Don't go and research us. We'll tell you what you can use and what you can read. And I saw a fantastic meme that's been circulated amongst ex-Mos and ex-J-Dubs, where it has a cartoon drawing of a stick figure saying, "Can I ask questions? Yes, here are the list of approved questions you may ask. May I do research? Yes, here are the list of approved places you can research." And then you can come to the approved conclusions that we have already vetted for you. Is that kind of the way they still try and combat the age of internet?
Precisely it.
And so there are a few ways to look at this, and I'm so glad you bring up Quentin L. Cook, because he is just the smarmy little pencil pusher that he's my arch nemesis. I hate this guy so much. But I have so many good reasons for it. I promise, I really do. I hate very few people, only when they really deserve it. My point is, the church understands what the fuck is going on, and they know they're fighting a losing battle. That doesn't stop them from buying up a ton of ad space, putting together extremely spiffy and polished and emotive movies and videos, these 5-minute shorts that they put out there and spread to as many people as they can possibly get, right? Recently, before April's General Conference this last year, the prophet Russell M. Nelson put together this prayer of faith, this global prayer of faith that got like 12 million views on YouTube, and people are eating this shit up. And it was all just like, just vapid crap, boring Christian prayer of faith. We pray that the pandemic will be over, and lo and behold, it didn't fucking work. So there once again, I'll reiterate, there are a few ways to look at this. The church, when it comes to the internet age, it is a gerontocracy. It is run literally by everybody in the presidency of the church is in their 90s. Everybody who is in the Quorum of Apostles, which is the leadership body directly under the presidency, are in their 60s or above, with only like 2 exceptions who are in their 50s, right? So like, these people don't understand the world that they are seeing that is being thrown at them, which obviously causes them to fear this world because it's so evil, it's so led astray by the adversary. But it shows how much they are losing this fight, because this fight is so much bigger than them and so much powerful than them, because they are purchasing all of this ad space. But at the end of the day, they don't understand how viral internet information works. They don't understand that they can never win this fight because of the structure of the church itself. And you look on YouTube and you Google anything Mormon, and you see that the surreptitious recording of the temple videos has 900,000 some odd views, when a general conference talk has 5,000 views, right? So even the 7 million members who are the chapel attending Mormons, and we'll see what that number looks like post-pandemic, I posit it will be probably about half of that. Wow. You know, those people are not engaged to the point that they are capable of combating a very small group of content creators who are truly informing the world about Mormonism. And that group of content creators, the podcasters, the YouTubers, the bloggers, the historians who are writing articles that then are turned around and are turned into content on YouTube and bite size and sound clips and so on and so forth. That group of content creators are creating a tidal force that the church cannot withstand. However, the flip side of that is, and this is going to go to I believe our second poll question. In what form is the church going to survive? Because as a corporate entity, it currently sits on a nest egg well over $200 billion. It is the wealthiest.
Can you just say that again?
$200 billion. So it is the wealthiest religion in the world. It is more wealthy than the Catholic Church. It is more politically powerful than any single denomination. You could argue that evangelical Christians in America are extremely powerful, but they're not run by a single group of people. They're not run by a leadership. Evangelical is a broad term that encompasses a lot of small denominations. Mormonism is a single monolithic structure that is insanely politically powerful. So to what extent is it going to survive? As a corporate entity, right now, all $7 billion that they take in every year of tax-free money in tithing could dry up tomorrow, could all go away, and they are never going to run out of money. So the church will always survive as a corporate entity. But a corporate entity with a bunch of empty churches and no butts in the pews, is that really a church? I don't think at the end it really matters. I mean, I just think we should tax the shit out of it.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. Now, you had talked about content creators who are kind of getting ahead and telling the story about the church and its history. And it seems like one way they're trying to deal with this is just by making these announcements, these releases and things like that. But I know that many religions have a dark underbelly of like some sort of group that of people they don't talk much about that will do things to try to intimidate these people to silence. Does the Mormons, this may be a dumb question, like a T-ball question, but does the Mormons have something like that, like a secret service of Mormonism or something?
Like Scientology does when they go after, is that what you mean, Eric?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, they do. It's called
Wow.
the Strengthening Church Members Committee.
It sounds,
They have
it sounds
a whole-
wonderful. It
It
doesn't
does.
sound
They have a whole
intimidating at all.
I know.
Wikipedia page and everything. Bryce, I think you probably can explain it best.
Yeah, it is essentially that they are just primarily a data collection agency that works within the church, and they retain files on every single member, and those files describe basically any public statements the person has made about the church. It includes their membership records, which membership records retain any of the content in the bishop's interviews that's collected, like Shannon, everything that you described, talking to your bishop, that 4 hours of interrogation when you were 16. That was all in your bishop's folder. You're losing your son, that was in your file as well, your membership file. So the SCMC files include those membership files in addition to any public statements the person has said about the church. And oddly enough, Mormons still believe that it's because of their valiant service that they are called to be, in the leadership body of the church, when, in actuality, it's all data driven.
So I'm going to have quite a file after this because,
Wow.
and my records are still in the church.
And will they then?
This sounds almost like communist Russia or the Nazi regime, like where they would have these secret police and are family members encouraged to quote unquote report?
Right.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's scary.
So I'm loath to make modern comparisons to anything like, North Korea or communist or anything like that. Certainly the church's foundations in Utah are exactly that. And in fact, one of the programs that was instated by Brigham Young, that wonderful bastard that we saw earlier, was the home teaching program. And the home teaching program was basically to go, and this was during what was known as the Mormon Reformation era, or the Mormon retrenchment period. And it was a system that was created as men in the community would go around and police the families and watch for iniquity and report their findings to the leadership. And it is a practice that remains in place in some form or another today in the church.
Wow. Wow. So a lot of the Mormon life is very insular. People work together. So they could lose their job if they're found. You could lose your family. You could be kicked out of home. These are very real threats, right?
They are extremely real threats. Shunning happens in the church. It's not quite as bad as, say, Jehovah Witnesses or Amish and stuff. It's not quite as severe. It's not required. They say we don't require shunning, but it happens. Family members will turn on you if you leave. They call you apostate. They fuss at you all the time. If you stop going to church, your neighbors stop talking to you, and that kind of thing. Home and visiting teachers, those are kind of your assigned friends, or ministers, as they call them now. But, once you're out of the church, you don't ever see them anymore. And so, there's all of that. You're shunned.
And yes, believe it or not, it is called by both Mormons, chapel attending Mormons, and ex-Mormons, the Mormon Mafia.
Yes.
And when it's said by members, it's like whenever you move somewhere, like say, my partner and I, we just moved from Seattle to Pennsylvania, right? If we were Mormon, all I would do is I would call up the local bishop and say, hey, I'm going to arrive on, July 13th. Can you have some elders meet us at the house? And I'd love to meet some of you and help us unload the truck. And they would. And instantly I got a group of 10 guys waiting in front of the house before I even arrived with the moving truck to help me unload it. And guess what? Each of them knows the best dentist in town, the best car mechanic in town, and the best A, B, C, everything. And guess what? All of those businesses happen to be Mormons too. So that's the insiders Mormon Mafia. But then, of course, from the outsiders, the ex-Mormons call it the Mormon Mafia because it's a goddamn mafia.
Yeah, it'd be a shame if something bad would have happened to you if you leave, kind of thing.
Right.
Let's move on a little bit.
Protection money. Yeah. Sorry.
Let's move on a little bit more of the technical stuff. I was born and raised a Christian, and we called the supernatural being a god. I assume Mormons do the same thing. They call him God or the Father or something. Is there anything different about that?
No, I mean, Mormons believe in what they call the Godhead rather than the Trinity, because they see God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost as separate entities. The Holy Ghost doesn't have a body. God and Jesus Christ do. And so they call him God, or Elohim is how they refer to him in the temple. They refer to Christ as Jehovah in the temple, but most times they don't so much because they say their names are sacred. You're not supposed to say them very much. It's taking
That's very Jewish.
Yeah.
So when you give Godhead, he says Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
I'm going to cut that.
Except you're not supposed to do that, The old
I'm stealing that.
The rules since 1982.
That was gold. Thank you.
He'd been working on that one all week, Bryce. You can have it.
Worth it.
Yep.
So I noticed that Mormons tend to talk about Heavenly Father. That kind of is the go-to expression, but that encompasses all of them, and that's the same dude that then came down to earth as Jesus, and then
no.
Okay.
They're God and Jehovah. Jehovah's the first son. Lucifer was the second son. Heavenly Father is the God, and so you don't see God very often. He's only there to say, behold, this is Jesus Christ, my son, who I am pleased with, hear him, and then he steps away. That's all he does. Okay. And so when it came to the creation, and you see this in the temple because it goes through the whole creation, God tells Jehovah to take Michael, who Mormons believe becomes Adam, to go and create
Jesus.
The world. So Jehovah or Jesus and Michael go and create the world, come back and report to God. Then God tells him to do all the different steps. God doesn't get involved until man is created. Then God and Jesus go down, or Jehovah. They turn Michael into Adam, make him alive. Then they create Eve and then leave him in the Garden of Eden and go on from there. But the God of the Old Testament is still Jehovah. So it's kind of really screwed up because they don't really make sense. Yeah.
And on that point, the Garden of Eden, now that's in upstate New York, right?
No, it's in Missouri.
Missouri, I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
it wasn't over in the
Oh,
Middle East at all.
Have you been to
No.
Missouri? It's
I-
called
I-
Missouri for a specific reason.
Oh my God. It's misery for
Ugh.
sure. Holy shit. Yeah.
Our
Oh my
formal
gosh.
apologies to
Jackson
anybody from
County,
Missouri.
Missouri. Yeah. Oh, Mormons
Jackson
have this
County.
yeah, this whole thing that just before Christ comes, certain elect Mormons are going to be called to return to Jackson County, and that's where he's going to come first, at this place called Adam-on-Diamond, which is where Adam built his altar after being thrown out of the Garden of Eden.
So the
Yeah.
Garden of Eden was not in the Middle East at all.
No,
No.
not according to
And-
Mormons.
And this, okay, so like we can, oh God, we can spend so much time on this.
I know. I'm like,
So,
we've already gone 2 hours
Mormon
here.
eschatology is a dense nugget of poop. Okay,
Mm.
so this place, Adam
This
on
reminds me of like
Diamond,
Jurassic Park and that Triceratops.
A big pile of shit.
right? Yeah. So okay, this place, Adam on Diamond, when the second coming happens, that's when the priesthood keys. So okay, Jesus gave the priesthood keys to Peter, James, and John when he came here, right? Because Jehovah, with the help of Peter, James, and John, formed the earth, and they went down and created earth as we see it. And they basically acted as God's emissaries to create the earth. And this happened after Jehovah and Lucifer presented their plans to Elohim, to God, or the Council of Gods, I'm not sure. And God chose Jesus's plan that had free agency instead of Lucifer's plan that included everybody getting to the celestial kingdom. We could spend a lot of time on that too. Everything I'm saying, we could spend a lot of time on this, right? So Jesus gave his priesthood keys to Peter, James, and John, who then passed those priesthood keys to Joseph Smith in the form
Dun,
of
dun, dun,
angels
dun,
on the
dun.
banks of the Susquehanna River, where I now live. And those priesthood keys then passed through Joseph Smith to each successive leader of the church, each successive president. So when the second coming happens, Jesus is going to descend to Jackson County, Missouri, Adam on Diamond, which I think is actually in Clay County, which is weird. So Jackson County is where the Garden of Eden is, but Clay County is where Adam on Diamond. Doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. It's just supposed to make you think. So they'll return to Adam on Diamond, where all of the biblical prophets will appear in a resurrected form, as well as Joseph Smith, and all of the modern prophets of the Restoration will all appear in Jackson or in Adam on Diamond. At which point they will all confer their priesthood keys onto the head of Jehovah, of Jesus, who will then cause the rapture to happen, which will then bring about the second coming. So Jesus is basically a powerless God until he can get all of those dudes to get together and put their hands on his head.
Oh my God, Bryce, I feel like I need a bloody cigarette and a lay down after that, because that's just exhausting.
You and me
But
both, buddy.
Mormon's version of the rapture is not getting taken up into the sky so much. It's more just being twinkled, as we call it, where they're just instantly resurrected. Just so you know.
Hey,
But they all call it twinkle. So we were like, I want to be
in the
twinkled.
twinkle of an eye. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you've just given us the cliff notes of the whole Mormon faith.
The cliff notes of the cliff
Yeah.
notes.
Wow.
Yeah, right, like-
I mean,
Oh,
we're
so much more.
telling you just a small microcosm of what is so much screwed up stuff. in
Thank
there,
you. That's
You
awesome.
know? And I mean, yeah, we went on for 2 hours. God, sorry.
We're going pretty long here. I'd like to hit on a couple of other things a little quicker
Yeah,
than
sorry.
We can try.
it's fine. So as a Christian, I used to pray. How do Mormons communicate with their deity?
They pray.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's, you're saying it to Heavenly Father, and then you end with in the name of Jesus Christ. So you're praying to God through
Right.
Christ.
And preaching is an integral thing you talked about, and it
Yes.
encompasses the whole life.
Yes.
Mormons, 24/7 Mormons. Yep.
You're supposed to be. If you have non-Mormon friends, you're supposed to be trying to make them Mormon.
Right.
And it's annoying.
And is there a
Doesn't matter if they have
specific
14 Book of Mormons, you still have to give them another one. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
We know that you said Jackson County and Clay County, Missouri are like the Garden of Eden, and everybody will show up there eventually. Is there any other holy spaces or places that Mormons go to? Maybe I assume Salt Lake City or something.
Salt Lake City, yeah.
Every single temple. All the
So
temples.
okay.
there are 140 some odd temples. Those are all like special consecrated ground, but there are all of the locations, yes, temples. Ooh, look at that Washington DC temple. The six spires are literal. Those
Very
six
phallic.
spires are literally gold, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's
My
all these temples.
My favorite is San Diego because it looks like it belongs in Disneyland.
Yeah, it's pretty great. Yeah, and they all have their own kind of
Orlando.
beauty, and they're also terrifying. But there's also the Mormon history pilgrimage, which involves Salt Lake City, of course, and St. George, Utah. Probably Manti as well. The Manti Temple is super, super cool with a fascinating history. But then across to Sweetwater Creek, which is Martin's Cove from the Martin Willie Hancock Company, then to Nauvoo, Illinois, then to Missouri, a bunch of places in Missouri, Jackson County, Adam-on-Diamond, the Hans Mill Massacre site, and then to Kirtland, Ohio, then to Palmyra, New York, and then to Sharon, Vermont, the birthplace of Joseph Smith. So that's kind of known as like the Mormon history pilgrimage that'll, some Mormons, a small percentage, will do at some point in their life. And I've done it as a person who's not a Mormon. I'm a cultural Mormon, but who's just a Mormon history junkie, and it is so much fun. Highly recommended. If you don't know what's going on, it's going to be boring as hell, but if you are interested in the history of the church and you go to these sites, it's super, super fascinating.
And you kind of go through that on your podcast in the Glass Box or Naked Mormonism.
That's all Naked Mormonism where I went through
Okay.
that. In fact, in 2017, I did the whole pilgrimage, and I made audio logs as I went about it. It was just a party. So much fun.
For anybody who's here watching this, please check out that fantastic podcast that Bryce has done. It is just brilliant. In fact, this and the Glassbox podcast, because you will get an understanding of the culture and the history of the faith in no better way.
And then are there different sects of like, not sects like with an X, but like different versions of LDS? Like Christianity's got Baptists and Lutherans and Nazarenes and stuff like that.
There were something like recently documented 400 child sects of Mormonism that all sprang. Thanks for bringing this up, Shannon. So this is a very basic, and this is what's known as a Brighamite centric timeline of the church.
This is basic.
This is extremely basic.
We spent 2 hours trying to be basic about the church. What did you expect?
Right? What do you expect? Some of these are religions that were born a long time ago and survive today. Many of them are born and die within a single generation. Many of them are just a single family that believe in it and adhere to it, that follow a single prophet. Wow. But some of them, like a little tiny sect, a little tiny branch is known as the Bickertonites, but like fucking Alice Cooper is a member of that, right? Like, so
Alice Cooper?
Yeah. So
the
like
singer?
these, yes, exactly.
Wow.
So like these child sects, they span all across America. I don't think anywhere but America, because of fucking course this religion is as America as it can get, right? They're all over the place. There's a bunch of them. They all go by like different variations of Latter-day Saints or Church of Christ. So it's almost impossible to identify one of these religions as being, of Mormon roots just by looking at the name of it. But
sure.
If you understand like who the leader was, then you can understand, where they came from, or like what thing happened in the church that caused them to have a disagreement that they split off and formed their own church. And it's a fascinating tale.
Now, this is kind of, I think, some of the most coming up with some of the most important parts of this discussion that we're having here. Within the LDS Church itself, what are some unique struggles that the adherents face within it. I'm kind of, we touched a lot on what women face, but I would imagine the folks in the LGBT community can't have it much easier either.
Yeah, we talked about a few already, like the soft shunning, but there's also excommunication. I think they're trying to make that a little more PC and call it something else, but it's still the same thing. It's a very harsh action taken against you if they've decided you're being an apostate or that you are sinning too much, you drink too much coffee or something, but
So
that kind of thing. Yeah.
there's no room for somebody to be LGBTQI. There's no room for somebody to not adhere to the hierarchy or the misogyny. There's no room for any of that.
No, I mean, if you are LGBTQ plus, as long as you don't act on it, then you're
Uh-huh.
welcome there. Just don't act on it. You can be it, you
celibacy.
can claim it, just don't do it.
Yeah, it's required celibacy for LGBTQ members, which is I in my opinion an insanely and disturbingly immoral and barbaric stance.
Yeah.
But of course it's a religion, so would we expect anything different?
Right. I mean, this is a religion that very much did conversion therapy. They did it at BYU in Provo
Oh, wow.
for
Yeah.
years. And they still, I mean, they're sort of saying they're against it, but they're not really.
Wow. So
It's foul. Yeah.
I mean, that's we could probably dive into that for another half hour, all of those aspects. And I appreciate you guys touching on some of those. But if people find themselves taking the brave steps to sort of question the faith, to come out, how do you provide a soft landing place for those who are coming out? What's your tips on how we can support people coming out of that religion?
Biggest one is just be a safe place. Because I mean, like we talked about, there's so much emotional manipulation. There was so much of the learned behavior and the control mechanisms that are used. And it's hard to break from that. It's hard to break from the Pavlovian conditioning and understanding that they're trying to, and so be somebody safe for them to talk to. Sometimes it is hard to hear what's good about the church. I mean, I think there are some good things in there. And when you're first coming out, you really don't want to hear it. So be ready to talk about what the person actually needs to hear rather than, your personal thing. But yeah, the biggest one is just to be a safe place and to recognize that, there's psychological damage, huge amount of psychological damage that happens. I mean, we're still dealing with mine. I mean, I was looking through mission journals and totally freaked out over how much abuse I went through that I didn't recognize as abuse then.
Really
And
glad you made that point about psychological abuse, because I knew the history of, or a little bit about the history of the Mormonism, but until now, I never fully understood just how controlling, and I hear all these psychological tactics that are pounded into adherents day after day, and I can now feel myself like, oh, I have to also take this into account and really be cognizant that there is probably some psychological damage, and just be patient and listen to them. And so I'm really, really glad you brought that up, because if I had come in contact with an ex-Mormon, I wouldn't have fully understood, and I can never fully understand, but I wouldn't have understood as deep as you guys are telling me it is.
Yeah. And to understand that once people get out of that echo chamber or that insular bubble, they have so many new things to learn, and perhaps ill-equipped. I like to think, or I don't like to think, but it's often been said that we were infantilized in these religions, and so suddenly somebody comes out having to relearn how to live. And there's some great podcasts. One that I think is great, the How to Heretic podcast, where ex-Mormons speak about how to navigate your life. How do you have your first drink? How do you navigate relationships? What do you do in a world that isn't full of magical thinking? And they do it with a really humorous. I know you guys have worked with them as well.
Uncles are great. Yeah,
they are.
Great resource. And I want to just kind of echo that point. I think I'm very much of the opinion, I take possibly a slightly different approach, but also similar. I try and tread lightly, but carry a big stick when it comes to stuff about church history and church culture, church dogma, the theology of it. But that has a barrier of entry, right? Like I've devoted years to studying this, and I feel very comfortable with the material, and I'm the only me. Nobody's got the time that I do, right? So nobody's going to go through that. So I think it's important to understand where somebody is coming from and try to identify where they're coming from, and also identify based on what they say in the conversation, what they are expecting your reaction to be, and don't have that reaction. Do anything that's possible to break their expectations of what they think is going to happen in a conversation. And, you know, I think a great resource for this is Anthony Magnabosco in using street epistemology, just using the simple method of asking people questions. People love to be listened to. People love it when they know that you're paying attention to what they are saying and you're asking them questions. So when you're asking them those questions and they are going about explaining their thought process and explaining where they're coming from, telling anecdotes and stories about their upbringing and who they are, they're going to open up to you. They're going to express vulnerabilities. And you don't have to immediately then come at them with a CES letter fact and try and break down their worldview, because instantly all of that rapport, all of the ability that you built up for that vulnerability is just gone. It's out the window. So trying to build up that rapport in small conversations over a long time, you know, like our poll showed, a lot of the attendees have at least one Mormon in their life, right? And building up that rapport over a long period of time, that you are somebody who can be trusted. You are somebody who is not going to hit them with an anti-Mormon fact. You're somebody who would actually listen to what they think and how they think about the world. That can create yourself as a resource and make it so you can become a bridge to a community and to a world that, frankly, they're scared of.
Wow.
Well, it's like
said.
what,
Thank you.
Yeah. It's like when I was recently talking to Bryce, and I ended up telling him more details about certain parts of my life than I intended to. Bryce's response at the end, I mean, I was tense because I'm used to this from a man, was not what I would get from a man. I'm, illustrating what he was just talking about, which was his response was, wow, that must be hard. Thank you for trusting me with that. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't tell me advice. He didn't give me any fucking advice at all through any of it. He just listened. And that is one of the things you need to have.
Yeah. That validation, that soft landing place, that support.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Bryce, Shannon, we have been talking here for nearly 2 hours, and we haven't even touched the Q&A session yet.
No,
but
if we're concluding, don't we first have to do a Hosanna shout? I mean, come on,
yeah,
Bryce.
That's right.
Come on, Shannon.
Times. Hosanna. Hosanna.
I got a piece
Hosanna
of paper.
to the Lord.
Hosanna.
I'm sorry, Eric. Go for
it. What the fuck is going on?
I respect the shit out of that, Sasha. I seriously. Oh,
that was best.
You just nestled into a fold of my heart, sir. Thank you so much for that.
I love you, dude. We have to do it with the same sort of enthusiasm that 80-year-olds can muster standing on the edge of a platform as they do.
Hosanna.
Eric, Hosanna. To Christ and yeah, okay. Eric, get us back on track, my friend.
I think we're going to have to address what just happened, because this just went way over my head and a lot of other people's heads. So, Bryce, Shannon, what the fuck was that?
When a building is dedicated like a temple or a church, they'll do the Hosanna shout at the end. But now the prophet's been doing it more. And I mean, there was one time, I forget which prophet did this. I think it was Monson or somebody before Nelson, where they actually televised the dedication of one temple, and they televised it like 3 or 4 times, and they did the Hosanna shout at the end for members to do. You have to have a clean white handkerchief and all this stuff, and you're waving it. I don't know the significance. It's been going on since the very beginning. There's a reason why I will refuse to buy white underwear, white anything, because of this church.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and drop a bunch of resources in the chat that they provided for us. In the meantime, I'm also going to drop some links to learn more about them and their work. In the meantime, we've got a lot of questions. I'm sorry, folks, I'm going to have to kind of cut it a little short, but let's go through this a little quickly. First and foremost, kind of, this was an early question, and I really like the question. Do the Mormons have any accepted form of birth control?
I mean, it's okay. Mostly you're supposed to just use like the rhythm method, but yeah, you can use birth control, but not permanent. They don't want you going get your tubes tied.
Okay.
They're kind of okay with a man getting a vasectomy because that's easy to reverse, but they really don't want you to. They'd rather you take pills or condoms and stuff like that. They used to say not use any at all, but then I think they had too many single moms with a whole bunch of kids because their husbands divorced them, and these moms were coming to them for welfare, and they got tired of paying it out. So they started saying, well, maybe you should practice a little birth control and not have so many kids. But, yeah.
And along the same line, is there a anti-vax movement in the where do they stand on getting vaccinated?
There are so many members that are so pissed because Russell M. Nelson has said, go get your vaccination. They are so mad about that.
It's super interesting too, because Russell Nelson, the current prophet, right? He was a surgeon. He was a heart surgeon. So his training is in medicine. Just like Dallin Oaks, his training, he was a Supreme Court justice in Utah for some crazy odd years, right? So these are all career professionals, businessmen anyway. But yeah, so he got the vaccination, and that has caused a huge rift in the community. Because Mormons are by and large extremely conservative. So yeah, it's interesting to watch the backlash, and then the backlash to the backlash, because people are like, the prophet said, you do what the prophet says, follow the prophet, don't go astray. That's a child's hymn. And then the people are think that the church is in apostasy, that the prophet's in apostasy. It's fascinating to me to watch.
It's like when I was at the hospital recently to get a blood test, and this woman comes in. Of course, a hospital requires masks all the time. She's like, I'm so tired of this. Why do I have to wear a mask in here? It's all over with, blah, 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 blah. And I looked at her and I said, you wear garments. They cover half your body. What's the problem with wearing a piece of fabric over your mouth?
Brilliant.
Oh, you're the best, Shannon.
Oh my gosh, she was so mad at me. I would have said more, but they called me up to the registration desk. So I'm like, anyway, sorry,
Now,
next question.
Another, we had, I think, briefly touched on it about in 1978, the LDS Church allowed people of color to get leadership roles.
Priesthood.
How is that? Like, are there people of color who are in leadership roles currently? Have they kept up on that promise? I mean, what is your, if I was a person of color entering the LDS Church, what do you think my chances of rising through the ranks would be?
Well, it depends on how much money you make.
Well, I just brought up the leadership hierarchy, right? And this is, as of recently, it has become slightly more diverse. But I mean, come on, you see it, right?
There's some stale pale males there.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
Yeah,
it is just
there's
a litany of
Gong.
milk toast. It's amazing.
Garrett Gong, who comes out of Japan? He's in the Quorum of the 12 now.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you go down to the 70, there's not that many. You might find more as bishops and stake presidents, but it still is not very much. It's mostly white people.
Token.
Yeah.
And to be clear, I want to reiterate this: the church itself is a white supremacist theology. There is no excuse. There is no other way to enter. It is a white supremacist theology. And when they changed their mind about Black people in 1978, that literally meant that they said, okay, we will allow people of African American descent to go to our heaven instead of being
Whoa.
allowed to be our slaves in heaven.
Right.
That
There is
was
a
the
black
change in
woman.
1978.
Yeah, there was a black
gracious of them.
woman sealed to Joseph Smith as his slave.
Jeez.
Damn.
So
Yeah.
it's it's inherently racist.
Yeah, I mean,
That
this
is-
could
No,
be an
it's not
entire like
inherently.
7-hour episode, just that.
It's
Yeah.
not inherently, it's explicitly racist.
Okay.
It is explicit, and it's not just racist, it is white supremacist. It is good old blue-blooded American, fuck yeah, white supremacist. Mormonism
I've
is
heard-
white. Please use the right term for this. This is the
Thanks
hill
for the
that I
correction.
die on.
No, I'm glad you've highlighted that, because I've heard the same expression that when some were able to become blessed by God, their skin actually turned paler, and that was somehow evidence that God was blessing. That's just the most abhorrent stuff they've said.
That saying comes from a prophet of the church, Spencer W. Kimball, and we are currently reading through his seminal work right now on the podcast, Miracle of Forgiveness, and it is a horrific, disgusting, and damaging. There's blood on the pages of that book. It is vicious.
It has caused thousands of suicides.
All right. I don't know
Wow.
where. All right. Let's see. Here's another question.
Sorry.
It seems like the community is a very, very tight-knit LDS community. Is there an issue with inbreeding? And if so, is there a higher, do you suspect there's a higher infant mortality rate within the LDS? Okay.
You get that more in the polygamous communities.
Bingo.
Right.
Yeah,
FLDS,
right.
fundamentals.
Yeah, and those are the more offshoots. In the regular LDS community, no.
Another question. Can Mormons remarry after the death of a spouse?
Oh, yes, they can, especially the men. Men can be sealed to as many women as they want.
Why does
Women
that not
still-
surprise me?
I know. Women can't. You have to have, if you want to be sealed to another man, then your previous sealing has to be broken. If he's dead, you can't get it. If he's still alive, then he has to agree to it. Yeah. But you can be sealed. Now, sealing, this is happening in the temple, and that's how it's the thing that lasts forever into the eternities. So that is how Mormonism still practices polygamy, is through sealings with a man marrying multiple wives.
What happens if you don't, like, let's say I am an apostate, I no longer believe in the tenets of the Latter-day Saint Church, but I don't legally sign or resign. Like it sounds like from our earlier discussion, you have to have an affidavit or legally resign. What happens if I don't?
Most people don't. If you want your name taken off the records of the church, then that's what you do. Otherwise, I mean, it's like there's a lot of people like me who don't, because they know that their father, if their father's still alive, when he goes in for tithing settlement, which you do every year, you have to give your proof that you are a full tithe payer every December, he will see who is still in the church of his children. And if you get your name taken off the records of the church, it'll show up in that. And there's a lot of people who don't want to hurt their fathers that way. And so,
Oh, wow. That's another controlling.
Yep.
thing. Wow.
And there's a lot of bishops that if you leave the church of your own free will and choice, will notify any family that you have.
Right. As a weapon.
As a weapon. Yeah.
Wow. Now we talked about how overtly racist the Mormon church is. And we've also talked about how they want the LGBTQ community to kind of do their thing in silence. Now they sort of softened the racism thing, but not really in 1978. Do you think that they're going to have any changes to the policy in regards to the LGBTQ community?
Yes, I do. And I can't remember if this was with you or if this was the previous co-host, Braden, but we made predictions of when that's going to happen. And if I recall correctly, I said in the decade from 2030 to 40, the church is going to allow LGBTQ plus marriage to take place and no longer have a bigoted stance about it. Even though in their books, their holy books, it says the shit that is like forms the foundation for the religious bigotry. Same with their ban on African Americans, right? I think they're going to soften it to the point. And Shannon, you and I have discussed this. I think the church is in the process of getting out of the marriage business, and they are working on transitioning to a sealings business instead. And Shannon talked about this, that like the sealing is the eternal thing that like lasts forever. The marriage is kind of like a separate thing that happens before the sealing process itself happens. And when you're married in the temple, you get your sealing done with your partner, and then you are sealed for eternity. I think the church is going to stop doing marriages so that they no longer have to take a stance on LGBTQ plus stuff.
Because they'll be forced to do them otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
So what
and
you're
eventually,
saying,
yeah.
So what you're saying is they'll somewhat allow same-sex marriages, but not same-sex sealing.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. Yep.
That's
Let me-
So
that's
I
a
think
giant
they will,
loophole.
I
It is
think
a
they
huge
will.
loophole.
They
It
will
should
allow
butch-
members to be
Yeah.
gay or to be, transgender, or they will allow members to be practicing and no longer like you, as long as you don't act on it. I think they'll remove that restriction, but they won't allow them to be sealed to their partner in heaven for
Right.
eternity.
And you can't do the temple work stuff.
Got it.
Yeah.
Another question is, where does the word Mormon come from? It's
The Book of Mormon. Yeah. Joseph Smith even is the one who called everybody Mormons. And so it's really funny that good old Russell M. Nelson is like, no, calling us Mormon is a win for Satan. Because I'm like, they've been doing it since Joseph Smith. But it's because of the Book of Mormon itself.
Mormon a character in the book?
Yeah, he's one of the authors of, because the Book of Mormon itself is like the Bible. It's got several other books in it. Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jeremiah, Book of Mormon,
It's a song?
Ammo, Cabal, Helaman, Nephi,
beautiful.
Book of Mormon,
Triggered.
Book of Moroni for the world, the second witness. That's the Book of Mormon. Yes, I memorized that in seminary
Need
class when
another
I was
cigarette.
in 10th grade. I am
Wow.
54 years old. That should tell you how long I remember that fucking song. Anyway,
You're not indoctrinated.
not at all. Mormon in there, he's the one that took all these plates that they'd been writing on and condensed them
The
down to
golden
one
plates.
set.
No, not the
golden
gold.
plates.
He wrote them into the golden
I
plates.
see. Sorry.
There
But
were
he
the
was
large
condensing
plates,
all
the
of
small
these
plates,
records.
the brass plates, the plates of the Jaredites, and oh shit, what's the fifth? There was a fifth. No, the fifth one is the gold plate. So there were 4 sets of plates that comprised the gold plates that he abridged into the Book of Mormon. That is the gold plates that he buried in some random ass hill in Palmyra, New York. That Joe was out treasure digging and just stumbled on these things.
So yeah, they call them Mormons because of that.
So-
I walked into this discussion thinking that the magical underwear was crazy. Boy, was I wrong. Boy.
Oh, that's lightweight.
And
So-
to be clear, everything that we've discussed today, y'all are viewing the tip of the iceberg through a telescope from 100 miles off, right? Like
From
there's
Mars.
just so much more.
Well, we did ask for just the tip, so we appreciate you giving it to us.
And it took us 2.5 hours.
I keep my word.
You spoke about the faith is not actually referred to as Mormons anymore, as the leader is now said with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not the Mormons.
Russell M. Nelson, when Gordon B. Hinckley was prophet, Russell M. Nelson spoke in General Conference about it. And he's like, we need to use the full name. The next General Conference, Gordon B. Hinckley is like, I really like being called a Mormon because he was somebody to respect. And I just think it's wonderful being called that. And that pissed off Russell M. Nelson so much that when he finally became prophet, then it was like, fine, I'm getting my way now. That's all.
Wow.
But how is it going to change it? People, billions of people around the world know us as, the Mormons. It's the Mormons. It's never going to go away, no matter what he says, no matter how much money he throws at it.
Decades and hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing campaigns saying, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm your local Mormon," and doing with popular people and celebrities and so forth. So yeah, then to undo all that,
It's never going to go
Well,
away.
That was all the brainchild of Gordon B. Hinckley. And Gordon B.
Right.
Hinckley spoke from the pulpit and chastised Russell Nelson in his passive way. And Russell Nelson took that as a personal vendetta.
Yep.
All right, we got one last question.
Okay.
Does the LDS Church believe in demons and possessions and things like that?
Sort of.
Yeah,
Sort
so
of.
the first miracle of the church was a possession and an exorcism that happened to Newell Knight in September of 1830. And I actually, in my research, I call it just a bad trip, that Joe was just being a good shaman. So they do believe in possession, but also it's not like an on-off switch in Catholicism, like the demon possesses you and then you like have to have it removed from you. In Mormonism, it's much more that you give your mental stage to the adversary, who then takes over more and more. And as I'm sure this is not just a Mormon thing. I'd be surprised if it is, but they say that like the greatest thing that Lucifer ever did was convincing you that he didn't exist. Yeah. So yeah, Sasha, you've heard it before, right? So that's the thing in the Mormonism. It's like it's not so much that you get possessed; it's just that you lose the light of the gospel, or you lose the light of the Savior.
Okay. Got it. Whew. This was this was a thick boy, I gotta tell you.
Wow.
For just being
Thank
the tip,
you.
it was pretty darn long.
Oh
my gosh.
Yeah.
So
you guys
before
have
we
done amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we kind of close out and kind of do our conclusions part, Bryce, Shannon, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to kind of give out? Brief final, not about the magic underwear, because I know those are boxers or something, right? But any brief final thoughts?
I'll just say that like Mormonism, every time I am invited to give a presentation like this, and I of course want to thank RfR, the organizers, for putting this together, Gayle for being the executive director of RfR, and to Eric and Sasha for being the moderators and putting this together, and to Glenda and Helen for being the troll smashers and troll stompers. Thank you very much for that as well. To all of the attendees, this has been a really, really fun night. Whenever I am invited to give a presentation like this, to just say, "Oh, can you come do a quick and dirty on Mormonism?" Like, yeah, sure, an hour. Yeah, great. Yeah, good luck keeping me contained in an hour. And then we get Shannon on, who is just as much of a blowhard as I am. And like, I'm more than anything, I'm just pleased as punch that y'all sat around and listened to us gabbing for this long. So all of that said, like, the more you learn about Mormonism, the more fascinating it becomes. And I have learned that after leaving the church. Right. Like I left as a teenager and didn't give a shit about it until I was like 21, 22. And I'm like, oh my God, this is fascinating. And I started learning about it. And then I started making podcasts about it because it is that interesting. So of course, the shameless self-plug time, and it's in the comments and everything. If you want to learn about the history of Joseph Smith and the early church, Naked Mormonism is my podcast where I go through a serialized history of the church. And try to do like a Dan Carlin-esque hardcore Mormon history version of it, and try to give you not the apologist version of it. And if you listen to that entire backlog, you're going to have a lot of ammunition to talk to Mormon coworkers and friends and family, or the missionaries on the street. Start off with the Road to Carthage series. That's the last 10 episodes. But then, of course, for headlines and for Mormon culture and for deep dives into, brief topics, Glass Box, Shannon is an awesome co-host. I started off with Braden, and then he handed the reins off to Shannon, and she's been a wonderful co-host ever since. And for my, the depths of my heart, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for hosting me. And Shannon, thanks for presenting with me. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, I enjoyed it a great deal. I mean, I just like to talk to people, so that's always fun. But it is fun to be able to share these parts of it, especially because seeing the down and dirty things, it's important to know so that people know what they're getting into if they decide to get into it. But also knowing there are people out there that can help you lead. And that's important. So thank you. Thank you to all of you for being a safe place, because that's the other important thing is I'm like, a safe place is so vital. And your entire crew there is a very safe place. And that I appreciate.
Beautifully said, Shannon. Thank you
Yeah.
both. On behalf of everybody here, there's so much love coming your way from the chat, and those that will watch this once it's uploaded to YouTube as well. There's a huge amount of appreciation for the years of work you guys have done, and thank you so very much for sharing it with us.
Yeah, this RfRx project was sort of set up to be a resource for the future of not only to kind of understand how the different belief systems or different issues, but also how to approach it empathetically and work with folks who are struggling through that. And I feel that this discussion nailed it. And I've come out myself personally as a more empathetic and understanding person. So fantastic job, Bryce and Shannon. Thank you so, so much. All right, that's going to conclude. If you're still around, thank you so much. That's going to conclude this little bit of RfRx, but it's not going to be the last one. Next week, there's another foundation spotlight that we're going to be having, and it's on Free Hearts, Free Minds with Yasmin Mohammed. We've had Yasmin on back last year, late last year, talking to us about Islam, and it was a fascinating discussion. She was just a fantastic guest. And so the description is, in many Muslim majority countries, doubting Islamic teachings, leaving the faith, or same-sex love can result in harsh punishments, ostracizations, torture, or even execution. As you might imagine, these repercussions result in fear and deep psychological trauma. In this RfRx discussion, Yasmin Mohammed will share with us how the nonprofit organization Free Hearts, Free Minds is working to offer mental health support for these people. Free Hearts refers to supporting members of the LGBT community, and Free Minds refers to supporting free thinkers who choose to denounce the religion they were born into. So that's next week, same bat time, same bat place. Sasha, what's up next?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, there are so many other chats. Please go and take advantage of all of these that are uploaded onto the YouTube channel, all the previous RfRx discussions, and please feel free to share them on your socials. Let people know about episodes that have appealed to you. We'd love to get the word out there, and we'd love to spread this. We want to preach to you all. No, we want to share this great body of material that we've got here. Also, look at ways that you might like to support RfR. Have a look at volunteering with us. There's a newsletter, we have a Facebook page, we have the podcast, we have so many things. So please feel free to be a part of it all and share it with all of your friends and family.
And now our fantastic executive director, Gayle Jordan, please come on and share with us your thoughts on this discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it my turn?
Put the wine glass down.
Guys, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted just from hearing about it. I can't thank you enough for coming on. Let me start with I kind of have a little run through. Bryce sort of did my roll call, but thank you to Eric and Sasha for doing our interviews. That was fabulous. You brought out some new information that so many of us didn't know. Rob, Glenda, and Helen, thank you for troll smashing. I don't think we had a lot of activity, but we're always so grateful for you. Shannon and Bryce, I know this is not, it's not a joke. I know this was a lived experience for both of you. And while we carry on and we laugh, and we've had more fun in the chat tonight than I can remember in a long, long time, I know that these were painful, extremely personal moments for you, and for you to come on and to be as open and as vulnerable and as generous with your experience. I'm so grateful. To the rest of you who have attended, thank you for coming. If there are any ex-Mormons in the community that have come, or just doubting Mormons, or just Mormons, thank you for being here. If you will chat in recoveringfromreligion.org, our little green chat bubbles on every page of our website, or if you'll call 1-84-I-DOUBT-IT, we'd love to talk to you about it. It's peer support. We don't profess to be professional counselors, but we can guide you to some resources. We can help you get your thoughts together. You know, there's some value in trying to figure out what it is that's going through your mind. We'd love to hear from you. And for those folks, those very special folks in our group tonight, in our room tonight, tonight who have had the word donor or volunteer next to their name. They've committed to our mission. The mission of Recovering from Religion is to provide hope, healing, and support to folks who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. They are the lifeblood of our organization. So thank you for being here. Not only do they provide all of these hours with volunteering, but then they attend on the RfRx nights, and I am so, so grateful. I hope you'll all stay for the hangout time. This is where we get kind of a little informal. We stop the recording. You can turn your camera on. We can use one another's names. We can relax about that kind of thing. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting Recovering from Religion. You all have a great night.